Some nights, Sandra Melgar finds herself lying in her small prison cell, and she can't help but reflect on the twists her life has taken. She never, in her wildest dreams, imagined she'd end up a widow and a suspect in her husband's murder. It was unfathomable that a year and a half after his tragic death, a grand jury would quietly indict her, and almost 5 years later, a jury would convict her based on circumstantial evidence alone. No clear motive or physical proof tied her to the crime. Now, at the age of 59, every day since her husband's passing has been nothing short of a nightmare. Sometimes I still think I'll be going back home. I catch myself wanting to tell him things, forgetting that he's gone, Sandra shared during a recent interview. Her blue eyes were red and puffy as tears streamed down her pale cheeks. It doesn't feel like he's really gone. It's more like he's just temporarily away or on a trip out of town. I try not to dwell on it. She paused for a moment. I know I'll see him again. For the past 10 months, Sandra has called the William P. Hobby Unit her home. This women's prison sits amidst the Texas countryside. Sandra manages to stay in touch with her friends and family, many of whom still firmly believe in her innocence. She chats regularly with her daughter and only child, Elizabeth Liz Melgar Rose, though the noisy prison environment and Sandra's soft voice sometimes make for challenging conversations. She writes letters to her friends, who keep her posted about her Pomeranian Lola, who was there in the house on that fateful night. Most weekends, she gets to spend a couple of hours with a rotating crew of friends and family, thanks to one of her closest pals who coordinates these weekly visits. Liz stands as her mother's strongest advocate, taking it upon herself to be the spokesperson and passionately discussing what she sees as a grave injustice that has robbed her of both her mother and father. I've never seen my mom so shattered and devastated, and she's never been able to bounce back from that. She'll never be the same person. There's always going to be this void in her life. I can't put into words just how deeply this has affected her because it's been a monumental loss, Liz recently shared. Sandra grapples with the memories of that fateful night on December 23, 2012, the night her husband met his tragic end. Her inability to recall the events of that night has raised suspicions among investigators, who found it rather suspicious. Nevertheless, Sandra remains steadfast. She did not commit the crime. As Sandra lay in her prison cell, her thoughts often drifted back to the evening she and Jim had celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. On December 23, 2012, Sandra Melgar was startled awake by the incessant barking of their dogs. Her vision blurred as she struggled to orient herself in the dim room. Her body ached, and her head throbbed as she lay on the closet floor, hands and feet bound behind her back, her undergarments soiled. Sandra, who stands 5 feet 4 inches tall, tried to stretch out her legs and roll over to peek through a gap under her closet door, but her bindings and 2 hip replacements hampered her movement. Even if she could free herself, a chair blocked the door handle from the outside. In the bedroom closet, her husband of 32 years, Jim Melgar, lay lifeless, bearing 31 stab wounds to his hands and chest. The white walls were now stained with blood, and a gray telephone cord bound his feet. A medical examiner would later confirm that all of Jim's wounds were defensive, showing that he had fought valiantly against his attacker, rather than attempting to flee. One particularly brutal strike had nearly severed his right thumb, likely contributing to the extensive blood spatter in the closet and bedroom. The bedroom itself appeared to have been ransacked, with dresser drawers left in disarray and clothes, books, and pill bottles strewn about the floor. Sandra's black purse and red wallet had been rifled through, their contents scattered atop the blood-speckled white comforter. A small white medical stool at the foot of the bed bore blood stains, suggesting it had been used as a makeshift surface for a knife. Nearby, a wooden chair's back was marred with scarlet drippings. In the partially filled jacuzzi bathtub, where Sandra and Jim had celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary the previous evening, items bore witness to the tragic events. A white blouse, a green towel, and a silver chef knife with a 6-inch blade, stained with blood droplets in every crevice, revealed a chilling narrative. Police later identified this knife as the murder weapon. Just hours before this horrific night unfolded, Sandra and Jim had been celebrating their enduring love, marking their 32nd wedding anniversary with a dinner at their beloved Mexican restaurant. Their plan had been to continue their celebration in the jacuzzi, complete with candles, cocktails, strawberries, and whipped cream. Even after more than 3 decades together, Jim and Sandra remained deeply in love, as she would later convey to the authorities. Their journey had started during their senior year at Lamar High School, with Jim's unruly black hair and a somewhat awkward teenage mustache. He had been immediately smitten by the 17-year-old girl with blue eyes and blonde hair seated in front of him in class. Initially, Sandra had resisted Jim's advances for weeks until she finally relented, agreeing to join him and a group of friends for ice skating. Little did she know that Jim had orchestrated the entire event. As she arrived, it was just Jim and his best friend, who mysteriously disappeared after her arrival. Jim's teenage charm and a penchant for corny jokes, later known as Jim jokes, eventually won her over. Sandra admired his humor, intelligence, and thoughtfulness, while Jim appreciated her intelligence, down-to-earth nature, and lack of pretentiousness. Soon, they became inseparable, and in 1980, 2 years after their high school graduation, they sealed their love with a courthouse wedding in downtown Houston. In the jacuzzi that night, on the anniversary of their union, Sandra and Jim reminisced about their shared history and dreamt of their future together. They talked about selling their home to embark on a world tour, visiting places like the Grand Canyon, Ireland, and witnessing the Northern Lights. Jim, just 5 months away from retiring as a computer programmer with the Houston Independent School District, envisioned buying a beachfront property where they could ultimately settle down after their adventures. As they spoke, they took turns giving each other massages, culminating their evening in a moment of intimacy. After 2 blissful hours in the jacuzzi, as Sandra would later recall, their dog's barking interrupted their peace. Jim, wrapping a towel around himself and slipping into Sandra's slippers, headed out of the bathroom to attend to the dogs. Little did she know that this would be the last time she would see her husband alive. When she awoke approximately 15 hours later, she found herself bound in her closet, hands and feet tied, her body sore, and her undergarments soiled. Jim was nowhere to be found, and once again, the dog's frantic barking pierced the silence. However, this time, voices inside her home accompanied the barking, prompting her to scream out in desperation. Herman Melgar stood outside his brother's house just past 4:30 in the afternoon, puzzled by the unanswered door. Jim had invited Herman and his family over for dinner, but now neither Jim nor Sandra were responding to calls or the front doorbell, which struck Herman as odd. Jim's black truck sat in the driveway, and Sandra's silver car was parked inside the open garage. Herman instructed his family to wait by the front door while he ventured to the backyard, glancing over the fence. Jim, always busy with home improvement projects, had a plastic tarp hanging from the pergola on the back porch, evidence of his recent work. Returning to the front yard, Herman decided to check the laundry room door inside the garage. If it remained locked, he thought they would leave. To his surprise, the door was unlocked, so he entered the house. The inside was dimly lit, gray and stuffy. All the blinds were drawn shut. The dogs barked and jumped around as Herman opened the front door, creating an eerie atmosphere that his daughter, Marissa, would later describe as unsettling. "There's just something not right," she would recall. It was then that they heard muffled screams. Herman rushed to the back of the house and discovered a large chair propped against the closet door in the bathroom. Inside, Sandra lay on the floor in a black satin nightgown, screaming for help. Herman and his wife, Maria, attempted to remove the tightly bound restraints around Sandra's arms and legs. Herman retrieved a pair of scissors from the bathroom, and Sandra kept asking, "Where's Jim? Where's Jim?" She had bruises on her arms, including a dark one on her left bicep. After freeing her, she went into the bedroom and found Jim's feet protruding from the closet. She checked for a pulse, though it was evident from his cold, pale, and naked body that he was deceased. Sandra covered him with a blue jacket, and Maria escorted her back to the bathroom. Sandra was in hysterics when paramedics arrived, making it difficult for her to communicate with Stephanie Roberts, the first paramedic on the scene. Roberts noted in her report that Sandra remained in a state of shock and had periods of crying, and that she had no sense of time and last recalls a time of about 1 a.m. this morning. She did not realize that it was evening time and approximately 15 hours had passed. Police documented the bruising on Sandra's hands and arms, along with a small scratch on her left thumb. There was no apparent blood on her. Sandra explained to the police that after Jim had gone to let the dogs in, she left the bathtub and entered her closet to get dressed. She told them, "The next thing I remember is waking up at an unknown time in the closet. And at one point, she screamed for help, but seemed to have fallen back asleep, possibly experiencing a seizure." Sandra's health was compromised by a series of medical conditions, including lupus, an autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and grand mal seizures. Due to these seizures, she had resigned from her job as a licensed vocational nurse, believing that she could no longer perform her duties effectively. In the weeks leading up to Jim's murder, Sandra had experienced auras, which she described as a warning sign of an impending seizure. During seizures, she told the police, she would sleep for hours and awaken in a state of confusion, disorientation, and significant pain. As crime scene investigators meticulously examined the house, Sandra found herself in an interrogation room at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. She expressed discomfort with the cold temperature.
I did ask you to take a polygraph test.
Yes.
I did.
And I know I'm too shaking and I'm freezing. And
Sheriff Sergeants Sean Carrizal and James Doucet conducted a 3-hour interrogation, probing Sandra about the 36 hours leading up to Jim's death. Sandra was soft-spoken and complained of a headache. She provided specific details about some aspects, such as removing her boots in the bedroom, changing in the bathroom, and recalling their conversation in the jacuzzi. However, with other details, her memory was less precise, and she struggled to remember. She initially mentioned Jim being gone for 15 minutes to let the dogs in before she exited the jacuzzi, but later suggested it might have been about 5 minutes. When questioned about the timeline, Sandra admitted the following.
I'm so bad with time. I'm taking guesses here.
Carrizal inquired about their future plans, and Sandra leaned forward, burying her face in her hands and breaking into tears. Carrizal raised the possibility of her being involved in Jim's death, but Sandra cut him off, stating,
That's it. I need a lawyer. I'm not talking anymore because you guys are just trying to torture me here.
Doucet encouraged Sandra to take a polygraph test.
Are you familiar with a polygraph exam? Would you be willing to take a polygraph exam?
Which she declined, citing nervousness, shaking, cold, and concerns about it being used against her.
Okay, well
I just can't do
let
it
me
now.
explain this.
And I'd rather talk to a lawyer about it.
We're not trying to pin something on you. We're not trying to get you to say that you've done something that you haven't done, okay?
Her refusal seemed to frustrate Doucet, who interpreted it as a sign that she had something to hide. As the interview continued, Doucet told Sandra the following.
You are. We're going to find out everything about you. We're going to find out everything about your husband. We're going to talk to everybody in your neighborhood. We're going to talk to everybody that you're related to.
Sandra hoped that this extensive investigation would redirect attention away from her, stating,
But I hope you're looking somewhere else too, because it's not me.
Then Doucet probed further and asked Sandra the following.
And you and your husband, how would you describe y'all's relationship lately?
We have a great relationship, even better lately.
As the interrogation neared its conclusion, the detectives expressed their frustration with Sandra's lack of memory. They questioned how she could have blacked out during the moments when her husband, whom she claimed to love dearly, was brutally stabbed just feet away in the bedroom. They asked why she hadn't heard his screams. Carrizal pleaded with Sandra, saying,
I need you to help me. I need you to help me. I need you to help me on this.
I didn't hear anything, Sandra replied, her face still concealed in her hands. I didn't hear anything. Carrizal and Doucet exited the frigid, confined room, leaving Sandra crying with her face in her hands. Later, Carrizal would contact the Harris County District Attorney's Office to file murder charges, while Sandra remained at the station and crime scene investigators continued their work at her home. The DA's office ultimately declined to pursue those charges, citing a lack of evidence. The news of Jim's murder quickly rippled through their neighborhood. Concerned neighbors congregated outside, engaged in hushed conversations, speculating about a possible home invasion gone awry, and harboring fears of a potential return by the assailants. Some residents went as far as bolstering their own security by installing cameras and floodlights on their homes. The Melgars were recognized by their neighbors as a reserved couple who typically kept to themselves. Occasionally, they would catch a glimpse of Jim working in the yard or Sandra coming and going from the garage. Curiously, one neighbor recalled being in his garage until 1 a.m. on the night of the murder and couldn't recall any suspicious activity in the neighborhood. To be honest, if anybody was going to get robbed, it would probably be me because the garage door was wide open. I'm there. It was just me messing with my stuff. If someone were going to come down and try to rob somebody, they'd be like, "Look at that dude. Let's just go in there, tie him up and take all his stuff," the neighbor remarked. 2 days following the murder, Liz met with Carrizal and Doucet, revealing various items missing from the house, including a TV from the bedroom and Sandra's medication bottles of hydrocodone and phenobarbital. She had previously informed detectives about a backpack containing a gaming system and games that had been left in the garage. Liz also shared insights into her mother's seizures and health issues. "She's in quite a fragile state right now," she conveyed. "It seems that she's undergoing some post-traumatic stress as well. I mean, maybe something will be jogged in her memory later. It's hard to say." Unfortunately, no significant breakthroughs resulted from this information. Liz persisted with follow-up phone calls and mentioned damage to one of her parents' rental homes. Eventually, the authorities stopped responding to her inquiries, leaving both her and Sandra in the dark regarding the progress of the investigation. A year and a half later, in July 2014, Sandra was discreetly indicted for Jim's murder by a grand jury. Grand jury proceedings, shrouded in secrecy by state law, left the public in the dark about the discussions and evidence presented during those proceedings.
Sandra's case moved at a sluggish pace, even after the indictment. It passed through the hands of at least 4 prosecutors in the district attorney's office over the next 3 years, until it landed on Colleen Barnett's desk in May 2017. Barnett had returned to the DA's office in January of that year following a 4-year hiatus during Kim Ogg's tenure as district attorney. Throughout her 24-year career, Barnett had earned a reputation as a diligent and fair prosecutor, according to both her colleagues and attorneys who had faced her in court. She had handled over 70 murder trials, including the capital murder case against Suzanne Basso, a woman executed for luring a mentally disabled man to Texas under the promise of marriage and subsequently murdering him. Barnett was fully aware of the challenges in Sandra's case. No apparent motive, no confession, and no direct evidence linking Sandra to the crime. "It was a challenging case, but one I believed in," she asserts today. During the 13-day trial commencing in August 2017, Barnett portrayed Sandra as a calculating murderer who meticulously plotted Jim's demise, luring him into their bedroom with the promise of intimacy. Barnett told the jury that Sandra had tied Jim's feet with a gray telephone cord before using a knife to inflict a fatal wound from his chest to his neck. Barnett emphasized the presence of a bag of sex toys found on the bed, which Sandra later claimed was a gag gift from a friend. Barnett conceded that she couldn't definitively pinpoint a motive for Sandra's actions, instead presenting various theories, such as Jim's life insurance policy with HISD or Sandra's purported desire to end their marriage. However, as a Jehovah's Witness, her religion prohibited divorce. Sandra's attorney, George Mack Seacrest, a respected legal figure in his own right, painted a different picture of the seemingly frail woman seated at the defense table. Seacrest asserted that Sandra was a victim of investigators who had prematurely settled on a theory within 2 hours of arriving at the crime scene, an argument he supported with their initial attempt to file murder charges while crime scene investigators were still processing her home. Seacrest highlighted the lack of physical evidence connecting Sandra to the crime, noting the absence of her blood at the scene and the absence of cuts on her hands. He proposed an alternative theory. Sandra had fallen prey to a home invasion,
suffering a head injury and being bound in her closet while intruders killed her husband. For the jurors, observing Barnett and Sechrist clash in the courtroom was akin to witnessing a heavyweight boxing match. As the attorneys sparred, Barnett delivered a significant blow, aided by Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter analyst and crime scene reconstructionist from the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Rossi testified that the crime scene did not align with a home invasion scenario, as there were no signs of forced entry. The bedroom dresser drawers remained undisturbed, and she pointed to a lit candle on Jim's nightstand as evidence that no struggle had taken place near the closet where Jim was killed. Rossi affirmed that the majority of the blood was confined to the closet, with the exception of spatter on the back of a chair, the white medical stool, and speckles on the comforter. According to Rossi, this spatter likely resulted from the injury to the artery near Jim's thumb. She concurred with the medical examiner's report, asserting that all of Jim's wounds were defensive, and she noted his loaded handgun, inches from his body in the closet, which appeared untouched. "You're never going to shoot your spouse, even if she's coming at you with a knife. You're going to try to disarm her," Rossi stated, concurring with Barnett's assertion that Sandra had murdered her husband. After deliberating for 8 hours over 2 days, the jury of 8 men and 4 women found Sandra guilty of murder, sentencing her to 27 years in prison, well short of the potential 99-year maximum sentence. "We figured at that point she would be in her early 70s and maybe have a chance to see her grandchildren," the jury foreman would later say, speaking from his home a year after the trial, while opting to remain anonymous. "So it was a humane decision, frankly. Do we think this woman is a threat to society? None of us thought that." Sandra let out a shriek and nearly collapsed into her seat when District Judge Kelly Johnson read the verdict. The courtroom, filled with supporters who believed the trial was a mere formality to prove Sandra's innocence, was left in stunned disbelief. For weeks, they had tried to reassure Sandra that everything would turn out fine, perhaps to sustain their own spirits, but suddenly everything crumbled. It was as if they had spent the past 3 weeks deceiving their loved one. As Sandra was escorted out of the courtroom, clad in a red blazer and relying on a cane, she paused to embrace Liz one last time. When they parted, Liz crumpled to the courtroom floor. "I just remember the room spinning, and I felt like I was completely alone there. I think everybody expected the jury to return a not guilty verdict, and it was just... I don't even have words to describe it," Liz recounted. "I just felt completely lost and devastated, because not only had I lost my dad, and not only had this person gotten away with it, but now my mom is paying the price for it. And I've lost both my parents to a justice system that got it completely wrong." Sandra's supporters directed much of their anger toward Barnett, alleging that she twisted Sandra's words, exploited her religious beliefs, and concocted an implausible narrative that led to her incarceration. In contrast, the jury foreman maintained that Barnett's version of events made the most sense, ultimately pinning the blame on Sandra. He found her story inconsistent, citing her changing account of the time they returned home and how long Jim had been out of the jacuzzi before she retreated to her closet. He also questioned the authenticity of her seizure that night, referencing Sandra's medical records, which indicated stable seizures, and her visit to the neurologist following the murder, during which she made no mention of the alleged seizure. "The more you started listening to the things she said, the more you realized they didn't make sense," the foreman asserted, standing by the jury's verdict. "Every step of the way, when you really peel back the onion, you realize that she is lying. I would love to be able to believe her, but the evidence says otherwise." Admittedly, he added, "We're people. Could we be wrong? Of course we can be. I don't think we are." A month after the verdict, Sechrist filed a motion for a new trial, outlining in an 88-page brief how Sandra had been convicted based on an inept investigation conducted by investigators who were clearly theory-driven and lacked sufficient evidence to support a guilty verdict. The prosecution's case was built on conjecture and hypotheses, which were not rooted in evidence, Sechrist later contended. Sandy didn't kill Jamie. However, Judge Johnson denied his motion, setting in motion a potentially protracted appeals process and representing Sandra's final hope to demonstrate her innocence. Seated behind a glass partition in the visitors' center this past July, Sandra steadfastly maintains her innocence.
No, she softly asserts. Her voice, barely above a whisper, continues, I did not kill my husband. Her trembling hand moves to her mouth, and she breathes heavily. No, I didn't kill my husband, she repeats, shaking her head in denial. If not her, then who? I wish I knew. I wouldn't be here if I knew. Her breaths grow labored, and she clutches her chest, sensing the onset of a panic attack. This is a nightmare, she says. Sandra clings to hope for a future release, whether through a successful appeal or parole. Her eligibility date is February 2031, when she will be 71 years old. Having heard the complex and emotional case of Sandra Melgar's conviction for her husband's murder, do you believe in her innocence? Or do you think the evidence against her was compelling enough for a guilty verdict? Please share your insights and opinions in the comments below. On September 22, 2023, Suzanne Morphew's remains were discovered 3 years after her sudden disappearance on May 10, 2020. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation stumbled upon her remains during a search of an area in Moffett, Saguache County, as part of a separate investigation, breathing new life into the famously cold case of Suzanne Morphew's disappearance. A tumultuous personal life and an inconsistent recollection of events first pointed toward the husband as the likely suspect in what the police believed to be a murder. However, new evidence has called into question the 2-year-long crusade. Over 70 investigators invested 1,000 hours of work into Suzanne's case. 135 search warrants were issued, and dozens of over 400 people were interviewed before the police felt confident in charging Barry with the first-degree murder of his wife. Even after the charges were dropped based on inadequate evidence and mismanagement, there was no doubt in most people's eyes that Barry was guilty. However, after Suzanne's remains were found 50 miles outside their search area, and DNA evidence linked her death to a suspected serial killer, questions have arisen about what happened on the day of her disappearance. Is Barry Morphew far more resourceful than the authorities give him credit for? Or did something or someone from her personal life cause her death? Suzanne Morphew was born on April 11, 1971, to her parents, Jean and Adrienne Alexandria, and grew up with 2 brothers, David and Andrew. Everyone who knew Suzanne described her as an amazing, intellectual, and thoughtful friend. In 1998, while in high school, Suzanne met her future husband, Barry Morphew, and married him after 6 years of dating. Matthew was a remarkable ball player and was signed with the Toronto Blue Jays, while Suzanne pursued a degree in education at Purdue University. Barry's career ended before it barely began after a serious injury, and he switched tracks, beginning a career in horticulture. Suzanne had been teaching for 4 years when Barry started his landscape company, which gained steam as more time passed. Together, the couple had 2 children, Mallory and Macy. They had a picture-perfect life in Indiana until Suzanne was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. She beat cancer twice, and in 2018, the Morphews moved to Maysville, Colorado, for a fresh start and to be closer to their daughter, Mallory, attending Western State University. They moved to a gorgeous 7-acre property where Barry could hunt. He still worked as a contractor and had even taken up being a volunteer fireman while Suzanne retired from teaching, devoting herself more to the church and taking up sports. Mountain biking was a new pastime she was exploring. From the outside looking in, the Morphews were the perfect family, but they had their share of problems, all of which would come to light following the events of May 10, 2020. May 10, 2010, started a bit differently from most Mother's Day celebrations at the Morphews' residence. Barry and the girls were out of the house, leaving Suzanne alone in their home. Barry claimed to have a landscaping appointment in the town of Broomfield, 3 hours away from Maysville by car. The girls, on the other hand, went on a camping trip. Barry and the girls had planned to return home by the evening to celebrate Mother's Day with Suzanne. However, the planned celebration never took place. That evening, the girls messaged their mother to wish her Happy Mother's Day but received no text message in return. They found this odd since their mother was very active on social media. Expecting a few pictures from her best friend's daughter's wedding, they knew she had to be on her phone. After a few hours of no reply, Mallory and Macy reached out to their neighbor, Martin Ritter, and his wife to check on Suzanne. Mrs. Ritter made the trip down to the Morphew's house around 4 o'clock to 4:30 p.m. to discover an empty house. She called Barry, explaining the situation, and he told her to check for Suzanne's mountain bike. If it was not there, he instructed her to call the police, and that's exactly what she did. The police showed up at the Morphew residence, and Barry Morphew and his 2 daughters made their way back home, desperate to learn the location and status of Suzanne. The police found their first solid clue a few hours into the search. The discovery turned the investigation on its head. 2 deputies found Suzanne's mountain bike off a steep ravine, not too far from Murphy's home. The location suggested that Suzanne might have likely been in a crash, but the bike itself and the surrounding vegetation did not indicate signs of a struggle. There were no skid marks indicating she used the brakes on her bike. No damage to the mountain bike itself despite tumbling down the side of a ravine, no blood, and the vegetation in the area hadn't been disturbed. The deputies deduced it was obviously placed there by somebody. When they presented Barry with this information, he had a bizarre reaction. Barry's odd mountain lion theory would be the first of many outlandish stories, conclusions, and accounts that he would provide the investigators while they searched for his wife. Several people found Barry's handling of his wife's disappearance odd, to say the least. In a secretly recorded conversation with YouTuber Tyson Draper, he went into further detail about his mountain lion story. Barry was also absent from the search parties organized by Suzanne's brother, Andrew. He didn't believe Barry's story about the bike ride and suggested that she might have been taken on May 9th instead of Mother's Day. Suspicion eventually shifted to him when Suzanne's helmet was found 1 mile away from the Morphew's home, in the exact direction that Barry's truck telemetry showed he'd taken that morning. Investigators might have written it off as an odd coincidence if it was not in the exact opposite direction of the Broomfield construction site he was set to visit that day. In the preliminary interview he gave the officers, he claimed to have been woken up by his alarm clock around 4:30 a.m. and left straight for Broomfield. Yet, the telematic data from his Ford F-350 showed that he'd driven 1 mile west before heading to the construction site. When Barry was confronted with the data gathered, Barry provided a convenient explanation. He claimed to have been scouting elk earlier that morning at around 4:30 a.m. and was curious to see which direction they were headed so that he could track them down later. Apparently, Barry had a habit of tranquilizing elk and removing their antlers for sale. When the officers pointed out that he couldn't have spotted the elk at 4:30 a.m. if he was supposed to be just waking up, he amended his story to say that he didn't set his alarm for 4:30 and got up alone. When he was questioned specifically about the day of her disappearance, he said the day was one of the best the couple had had in some time. Barry said he was working with a co-worker in Salida that morning. He returned early, went on a hike with Suzanne, and then they grilled up some steak and were intimate. He said they went to bed together and suggested that it could have been the last time they saw each other, but as we've established, Barry is not the most reliable witness. When the police started to investigate Barry, they found out that he had lied about just about everything that happened that night. The investigators first knew something was wrong when they went through Barry's phone and vehicle telematic data on May 9th, 2020. While Barry and Suzanne Morphew did spend the afternoon and evening together, the events didn't align with Barry's narrative. At 2:42 to 2:44, the first significant deviation from Barry's account surfaced. His phone data revealed erratic movements around the property. When confronted by investigators, he said that he was likely hunting chipmunks with tranquilizers. At 2:47 p.m., Barry switched his phone to airplane mode, maintaining it until 10:17 p.m. Even the steak dinner he claimed to have shared with his wife was thrown into doubt. Investigators found only 1 dirty dish instead of 2, and later that night, more peculiarities emerged on the Morphew property. The police noted additional concerning details during their scrutiny of the data from later that night. At 9:30 p.m., an hour after Barry claimed to have gone to sleep with his wife, his car reversed, moving 96 feet backward from the driveway. Investigators speculated this might have been when he loaded her body onto his truck if he was guilty. From 3:25 to 3:48, the records indicated that the door to his truck opened and closed over 80 times. Though circumstantial, The evidence hinted at information Barry wasn't sharing with the police, prompting a closer look into the events of May 10th. Interviews with co-workers revealed that Barry was not supposed to be in Broomfield that day. Their contract wasn't set to begin until a week later, meaning there was no project to inspect. According to Barry, he only visited the Holiday Inn, the job site, a local store for granola and water, and briefly stopped at McDonald's to clean his windshield. However, surveillance footage obtained by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation contradicted his account. Barry was observed disposing of 5 trash bags near McDonald's and the Holiday Inn. When confronted with the footage, Barry provided an odd reason for his disposal method, claiming he wanted to clean his car without incurring proper disposal fees. Naturally, Barry's explanation unraveled when officers inspected his car. A co-worker also reported a strong smell of bleach and chlorine in Barry's hotel room a day after Suzanne's disappearance. Furthermore, investigators discovered that Barry changed his clothes multiple times throughout the day. As damaging as Barry's actions might seem, investigators had discovered no motive. That changed when they looked deeper into their personal lives. Barry and Suzanne's daughter revealed that both of them were not exactly as happy as Barry would like the police to believe. The text messages they discovered when they recovered Suzanne's phone and personal belongings from the house proved it. To say they were having marital problems would be an understatement. She was deeply unhappy in the marriage and talked about how her husband would not even consider divorce. In her Notes app, she kept a list of grievances that paint a pattern of physical abuse. Suzanne even mentioned that she was afraid to be alone in a room with him. She was also worried about his drinking, repeated attempts to seize her phone, and even speculated that he was unfaithful to her. When the police stormed the Morphew house on May 20th, they discovered a pen that Suzanne had purchased to catch her husband in the act. Ironically, it recorded her affair, not his. Her lover was a man named Jeff, whom Suzanne went to high school with. The affair had allegedly gone on for 1.5 years, starting around 2018. While Jeff sounded like an obvious suspect, the police were able to clear him of any involvement. Investigators believed that Barry somehow found out about the affair, and the note Suzanne wrote 2 days before her disappearance corroborated their theory. Barry had accused her of having a boyfriend. The spy pen, while instrumental, was not the only vital piece of information they uncovered in their search of the Morphew house. They found the cap of a tranquilizer dart in the family's dryer, a spent bullet casing in the bedroom, a large crack in the door frame, and what they believed to be the remnant of Suzanne's journal in the fireplace. All of these findings, combined with the telematic data, suggested that Barry might have planned the murder of his wife and killed her sometime in the afternoon of May 9th, 2020. The phone data from Suzanne's phone corroborated that story. After texting her boyfriend 53 times and sending him a selfie at around 2:10 p.m., she never used it again. The public did not learn that Barry was a suspect in his wife's disappearance until 2 weeks later when the police carried out a 2-day excavation of a construction site in Salida, which was one of Barry's job sites. In response to that, Barry released an odd video to the public, declaring his innocence. Barry Morphew was not arrested until May 5th, 2021, nearly a year since the investigation had begun. The evidence against Barry was circumstantial at best, but with the changing stories, repeated lies, and clear motive, the prosecution seemed confident in their case. Barry was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife, tampering with physical evidence, possession of a dangerous weapon, and attempting to influence a public servant. As if all that was not bad enough, Barry was also charged later on with filing a fraudulent election ballot in Suzanne's name. He claimed that he didn't know it was wrong and that Trump could use the extra vote. Barry pled guilty to the charge and paid a $600 fine. In August 2021, a preliminary hearing was held to decide if Barry Morphew's case would go to trial. And it was during this time that most of the information regarding the case became public knowledge. Over 4 days, the prosecution slowly presented the evidence they'd gathered and postulated what they thought might have happened. Barry killed his wife on May 9, 2020, took her body apart in a hotel room, disposed of the tools used, and buried her body in an unmarked grave. Barry's defense, however, pushed back hard,
poking holes in the prosecution's story. They pointed to the fact that cadaver dogs could not find any signs of human remains in Barry's car and the hotel room where he supposedly brought her body. They also alluded to the fact that the dart bullet cover might have been planted. There were visual inconsistencies in the pictures taken of the dryer. One showed that the cap was in the dryer, and another showed that it wasn't. The defense also stated that it would have been impossible for Barry to have used his dart gun to aid in the alleged murder since it was broken at the time. However, the defense team's smoking gun was the partial DNA they discovered in Suzanne's Range Rover and on her bike helmet, none of which matched Barry. What made the discovery such a big deal was that the DNA found in her car matched the ones found in 3 unsolved sexual assault investigations in Chicago and Arizona, raising reasonable doubt. Why was this not brought up earlier? The CBI investigator who collected the evidence went on military leave before he could follow up on the lead. To make matters worse, the defense was never informed of the existence of the foreign DNA matches. They were learning about it for the first time during that hearing, meaning the prosecution withheld exculpatory evidence that could have aided the defense. Throughout the hearing, the defense argued that with the existence of another suspect with a criminal record, the prosecution did not have enough evidence to prove that Barry should be convicted of the killing of his wife. They asked the judge to rule quickly on his decision, but oddly, he delayed his decision, citing the hundreds of man-hours and resources put into the case. It wasn't until September 7th that the judge decided that the case would move forward and set Barry's bail at $500,000. Barry walked out of county jail with his daughters on September 20th, 2021. 9 days before the trial was set to begin, the prosecution filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Barry without prejudice. What this means is that the prosecution is free to restart the case at any point, pending new information. Without a body of reasonable doubt on whether Barry committed the murder and misconduct on the part of the prosecution, it would have been a hard win. The prosecution also missed several deadlines, which earned them sanctions that excluded 14 key witnesses from the trial. The world was shocked when news broke of the dismissal, and Barry could be seen exiting the courthouse with a big smile on his face, and his 2 daughters with him. On September 22nd, 2023, a group of investigators dug up several shallow graves located in Moffett, Colorado, following an investigation. Suzanne's remains were identified with her dental records and chemotherapy port over 50 miles away from the projected search area, which was the mountains surrounding Barry's property. With the discovery of her body, people question if Barry could still be technically considered a suspect in the murder, since the police are certain that Barry's truck was not in Moffett on the 9th and 10th of May. Some people have pointed out that Barry could have had help in disposing of her body, and he could have made the trip to Moffett to bury the body and head back. Perhaps if they got a subpoena for his phone and car data for a longer period, they might be able to link him to where Suzanne's remains were discovered. But for now, Barry seems to be in the clear. However, the police and district attorney's office have not thrown in the towel yet. The district attorney of the 12th Judicial District told CNN that the case is still under investigation, and she would not be able to comment until more information is known. But they did offer their condolences to Suzanne's family. Iris Etienne, Barry's attorney, has been very vocal since the body has been recovered, hinting that it's more likely that Suzanne was one of the many victims of a serial killer since her remains were discovered in a boneyard. She believes that Barry was wrongfully targeted by law enforcement and hopes that they might eventually admit that they were wrong. In the meantime, Barry has begun a $15 million lawsuit against the prosecutors, sheriff stations, and many investigators, claiming he was wrongfully charged in the disappearance and death of his wife. In 1988, Heather Hodges and Ignacio Garaus met at a party while attending the University of Northern Colorado. Ignacio was a friendly guy with a great personality, and he immediately caught Heather's attention. It was love at first sight for both of them. Heather had a fun personality with a bit of innocence about her. She was beautiful, with pale skin, red lips, and dark hair. Ignacio found Heather enchanting and even referred to her as his Snow White. After Ignacio asked Heather out on their first date, she was excited. She immediately shared the news with her roommates, and they celebrated her newfound happiness.
Heather's friends were thrilled for her because she hadn't really dated before, and they believed this date could be the start of something special. Heather and Ignacio's relationship quickly blossomed into something more serious. Ignacio was attentive, always surprising Heather with her favorite flowers or coffee. His thoughtfulness and consideration made Heather feel loved and appreciated. After graduating from the University of Northern Colorado, Ignacio decided to take their relationship to the next level. He proposed to Heather, and she happily accepted his proposal. However, there was one condition that Heather attached to their engagement. If Ignacio ever cheated on Heather, she would immediately end their marriage, regardless of any apologies or attempts to make amends. This stipulation was a deal breaker for Heather, and she made it clear that she would not tolerate infidelity. Heather and Ignacio married within 1 year of their engagement, and it was a beautiful and joyous occasion. Ignacio became a law enforcement officer at the Greeley, Colorado Police Department, and Heather worked as a supervisor at the local credit union in town. Heather's colleagues and customers at the credit union admired her greatly. She was known for her exceptional skills in providing comfort to the credit union members when there were issues. One coworker even described Heather as wonderful all the way around. 5 years into Heather and Ignacio's marriage, they decided to expand their family. Heather ultimately gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Victoria. Becoming a mother brought Heather joy. Her entire world revolved around her new daughter. Ignacio, too, proved to be an outstanding father. From the outside, Heather and Ignacio's life appeared to be perfect. In 1997, Heather's father passed away from a heart attack. This tragic event was followed by an even more devastating blow just a few days later when Heather's mother was diagnosed with cancer. Determined to be a dedicated daughter, Heather dedicated herself to taking care of her ailing mother. Over the next several years, she selflessly provided care and support to her mother, who died in 2003. Ignacio proved to be a loving husband and father and helped out more with the couple's daughter, Victoria, and around the house. However, after months of supporting Heather through her grief, Ignacio started to turn his attention to a coworker, Shauna Nelson, a dispatcher at the Greeley Police Department in 2004. She was married to a Wells County Sheriff's deputy named Ken. Shauna and Ken had 2 children, but their marriage was on the rocks. Ken later said things changed between him and Shauna after Shauna returned to work after the birth of their second child. Shauna and Ignacio's relationship started as friendly and turned into something more. They began exchanging flirtatious comments and engaging in playful banter. Shauna's compliments caught Ignacio's attention, and she captivated him. Over time, Ignacio's interest grew deeper, and he spent a lot of time with Shauna. Their connection became more than just friendly, and they began to form a deeper emotional bond. As they continued to see each other, the intensity of their feelings grew. Their emotions shifted from playful flirtation to something more passionate and intimate. Despite their marital status, they found themselves unable to resist the pull of their attraction. Ignacio and Shauna's relationship was the talk of the town, but Heather remained oblivious to the affair. Despite everyone being aware of the situation, no one felt comfortable disclosing the truth to Heather. As a result, Shauna and Ignacio's relationship intensified, while Heather remained in the dark. Shauna found out she was pregnant and excitedly shared the news with Ignacio. However, Ignacio did not take the news well and started to question whether the baby was, in fact, his and not Shauna's husband, Ken. Shauna assured Ignacio that her husband had a vasectomy after their second child, eliminating the possibility of Ken being the father of the child. Knowing that he would be facing serious consequences if Heather found out about Shauna's pregnancy, Ignacio became nervous. He did not want this baby and desperately sought a solution. With Shauna's agreement, he convinced her to terminate the pregnancy and drove her to the procedure. As months and years passed, Heather remained oblivious to her husband's affair with Shauna. However, as time went on, Shauna became impatient and decided to confront Heather. One day, she followed Heather to the grocery store, accompanied by her best friend and partner in crime, Michelle Moore. Shauna and Michelle followed Heather discreetly around the store, observing her every move. Heather, oblivious to their presence, engaged in a conversation with a friend on her phone.
Eventually, Shauna approached Heather in the store and unleashed a tirade of insults and accusations. She called Heather names and hurled hurtful words at her. The incident at the grocery store left Heather deeply shaken. She decided it was time to confront Ignacio, as she recognized Shauna from his work Christmas parties and knew she was his co-worker at the police department. When Heather asked Ignacio why Shauna, who had always been nice to her, would confront her in the grocery store, spewing nasty words, Ignacio explained to Heather that Shauna had a crush on him, but that Heather had nothing to worry about. Ignacio told Heather he would tell Shauna to stop bothering her. He confronted Shauna and told her to leave Heather alone, and Shauna got very angry with him. However, Shauna did not stop harassing Heather. One time, Shauna showed up at Heather and Ignacio's house demanding to see Ignacio. Although Heather didn't want to think there was something more between the relationship of her husband and his co-worker, she couldn't help but wonder what he was really up to. Shauna confided in one person at the county dispatch center about the affair she was having with Ignacio. She expressed deep feelings for Ignacio, stating she was in love with him more than anyone else she had ever met. However, Shauna also expressed her frustration that Heather, Ignacio's wife, stood in the way of their relationship. According to this supervisor, Shauna revealed that she went to the shooting range to relieve her frustrations. While shooting at the targets, Shauna would pretend they were Heather. Despite Shauna and Ignacio's years-long affair, Ken, Shauna's husband, had no idea what was going on until he read Shauna's journal, which detailed her relationship with Ignacio. Wanting to stay together for the sake of their children, Ken did not leave Shawan when he found out about her cheating. Shauna was not the only person Ignacio was having an affair with, as Shauna herself was aware of Ignacio's relationship with another woman. This knowledge prompted Shauna to keep Ignacio on a short leash, as she was determined to maintain her position as the sole woman in his life. She threatened to tell Heather everything if he ever left her. Her obsession with Ignacio was growing stronger. In July 2005, Shauna took a step further to solidify her place in Ignacio's life when she got a tattoo on her leg with his family name. Shauna had developed an unhealthy obsession with Ignacio, and it began to escalate to the point where she started stalking him. If Heather and Ignacio decided to take their daughter Victoria to a restaurant, Shauna and her family would make sure to show up. Ignacio could tell that Shauna's behavior was becoming increasingly concerning, but he continued to engage in an affair with her. When Shauna found out she was pregnant with Ignacio's baby a second time, she told him there was no way she was ending the pregnancy. She wanted this baby. In March 2006, Shauna gave birth to her and Ignacio's son, Christian. Because Shauna was still married to Ken and Ignacio's wife had no idea he had a baby with his co-worker, Ken offered to raise Christian as his if Shauna would stay married to him, and she agreed. During the summer of 2006, while Heather was out one day, a woman approached her with shocking news. The woman informed Heather that Shauna Nelson had given birth to Ignacio's baby. This revelation left Heather in disbelief and confusion. Upon returning home, Heather confronted Ignacio about the child, demanding answers. Ignacio once again lied to his wife, attempting to conceal his affair with Shauna, and Heather continued to believe in Ignacio. One night in December 2006, Heather woke up to find Ignacio missing. She sat up and waited for him to get home. When Ignacio finally returned, Heather wasted no time in confronting him. Instead of lying like he had in the past, Ignacio made a choice to tell Heather the truth. Ignacio admitted to Heather that he had been out with Shauna that night. He went on to disclose that the affair had been going on for years, unbeknownst to her. Additionally, Ignacio told her about Shauna's 2 pregnancies and that she had recently given birth to his son. After Ignacio confessed to his affair with Shauna to Heather, Heather followed through on what she had said she would do if Ignacio cheated. She ended their relationship and kicked him out of the house. However, Heather's strong desire to keep her family intact led her to call Ignacio back the next day. Despite Heather's initial disbelief and anger, she did not want to break up the family and feared that Victoria would be raised in a broken home. When Heather spoke to Ignacio, she let him know that she knew he was in love with her and that she loved him back. Heather expressed her desire to keep their marriage intact and said she did not intend to file for divorce. However,
Heather made it clear that she was not ready to jump back into their marriage immediately. Instead, Heather presented Ignacio with several conditions to be fulfilled before considering taking him back. One of the conditions was that Ignacio needed to get an STD test. In addition to getting an STD test, Heather also recommended that Ignacio see a counselor. She believed that counseling could help them navigate the challenges of rebuilding their marriage and addressing any underlying issues that may have led to the infidelity. Furthermore, Heather asked Ignacio to give up his parental rights to Shauna's baby. Lastly, Heather requested that Ignacio end his relationship with Shauna. Ignacio was eager to save his marriage and agreed to all the conditions Heather proposed. He knew that he had wronged her and was willing to make amends. Ignacio called Shauna and informed her that he was ending their affair. While on the phone with Shauna, Heather, standing nearby, listened to the entire conversation. Moments after Ignacio hung up, a text message arrived on Heather's cell phone. The message contained a picture of Shauna and Ignacio's son, and underneath it were the words, "Ig's flesh and blood." Shauna's outrage was fueled by the fact that Ignacio had ended their relationship and decided to remain with Heather. She felt betrayed and abandoned, and her anger boiled over. As a result, she began speaking openly about suing Ignacio for child support, seeking financial retribution for their son Christian. By the start of 2007, Ignacio and Heather were in the midst of repairing their marriage after Ignacio's infidelities. Despite the challenges they faced, the couple was determined to rebuild their relationship and make things work. However, despite Ignacio's efforts to put an end to his affair with Shauna, she continued to harass Heather. The harassment became so bad that Ignacio and Heather had to take drastic measures to protect their family and property. They began parking Heather's car in the garage instead of out on the street, fearing that Shauna might damage their vehicle. Additionally, the couple sought legal assistance and had an attorney send Shauna a formal notice informing her to stay away from Ignacio, Heather, and their daughter, Victoria. The notice contained clear instructions to cease any harassment or intimidation. Despite the warnings and consequences, Shauna refused to relent. She continued to harass Heather through text messages, emails, and voicemails, taunting her with nasty and hurtful words. On January 23, 2007, just after 6 p.m., Heather was leaving work at the credit union. She was looking forward to going home and spending the night with her daughter. However, Heather's peaceful evening was suddenly disrupted as she exited the building with her co-workers. As they worked on their vehicles in a dark parking lot, the group was approached by a person dressed in black, wearing a Halloween mask, and brandishing a gun. The gunman was specifically focused on Heather, while others in the group attempted to hide. Pointing the weapon at Heather's head, the gunman told her to get down on her knees. Then, before pulling the trigger, the gunman said, "You ruined my life," and then shot Heather 2 times, point-blank range execution style in the head. After shooting Heather, the gunman ran into a red pickup truck parked nearby and sped away. As Heather's shooting unfolded, her co-workers and other witnesses in the parking lot called 911. Minutes after Heather was shot, paramedics arrived on site, but their efforts to save her life were ultimately futile. The gunshot wounds to her head had caused fatal injuries, and Heather was pronounced dead at the scene. When police officers arrived at the parking lot to secure the crime, they discovered that the shooting victim was their co-worker Ignacio's wife. Recognizing Heather as the victim, the officers contacted Ignacio and instructed him to go to the hospital immediately. Ignacio sped through the hospital's hallways to reach Heather's trauma room. However, as he approached, a doctor stopped him to deliver devastating news. The doctor informed him that it was too late and Heather had passed away. The news hit Ignacio hard, and he realized he would have to break the devastating news to their 9-year-old daughter, Victoria. Telling Victoria that her mother was gone was the hardest thing Ignacio ever had to do. He recalled that they spent a long time sitting together, hugging and crying inconsolably. While Ignacio was digesting the news of Heather's death, back at the crime scene, witnesses were sharing their accounts of the murder with the police. One witness reported seeing the shooter appear unexpectedly before quickly disappearing in a red pickup truck. Another witness suggested that the shooter might have been a woman based on the way they ran. During the investigation, a name that had come up concerning Heather's harassment was Shauna Nelson. Someone who knew about Ignacio's affair mentioned Shauna could have been responsible for Heather's shooting. The police officers at the crime scene were already familiar with Shauna and her husband Ken, as she was a dispatcher and a police officer. They knew Ken owned a car similar to the one the shooter was driving. With the evidence mounting against Shauna, the police issued an APB on their radios for both her and the red pickup truck she was believed to be driving. Ken Nelson, Shauna's husband, was working his shift that night and patrolling in his police car when he heard an alert for his wife and truck over the radio. He immediately began searching for his wife. Within 20 minutes, Ken located his wife driving his vehicle near their home. Shauna told Ken that she had been running errands. However, Ken became suspicious when he saw that Shauna was not wearing shoes, even though it was January in Colorado. Even more concerning for Ken was that she was dressed in his socks, underwear, and pants. After stopping his wife, Ken called in the sighting and requested assistance. Police officers soon arrived and took Shauna into custody. The authorities began investigating to determine if she had any involvement in Heather's murder. Investigators discovered a pair of shoes with Shauna's DNA on them, located less than 1,000 feet from the crime scene. Furthermore, the investigators recovered 2 shell casings from a .40 caliber Glock Model 22 from the parking lot where Heather was shot. The weapon was of the same type used by Ken for his work. This coincidence further strengthened the case against Shauna. The investigators also stumbled upon a Halloween mask hidden under the seat of Ken's red pickup truck that closely resembled the mask worn by the suspect in the Heather's shooting. During their search of Shauna's home, investigators discovered a fully drawn bathtub that appeared to be waiting for her. This tub led some to believe that perhaps Shauna was planning to clean herself of any blood spatter that could have been left behind after the shooting. Following her arrest, Shauna was subjected to thorough testing, and her clothing and hands were swabbed for gunshot residue. These test results came back positive. With mounting evidence, Shauna was eventually charged with first-degree murder. Even though shell casings matched the weapon used to murder Heather, the night Heather was killed, Ken handed his service weapon over to his supervisor, and the actual gun used to murder Heather had never been found. Yet because Ken Nelson stopped Shauna after the murder but didn't detain her, he was charged with tampering with evidence and accessory to first-degree murder. During her interrogation by the detectives, Shauna stated that she went out for errands and pulled on dirty clothes from the hamper, explaining why she was dressed in her husband Ken's clothing. Shauna mentioned when she got to the store, she realized she had forgotten her wallet and drove home. When asked about Heather's murder, she denied any knowledge of it and denied playing a part in it. Ignacio was also questioned extensively by the police after Heather was murdered, but was cleared of all suspicion. In February 2008, Shauna's trial began for the murder of Heather Garaus. Shauna pleaded not guilty to the charges. During the trial, the state argued that Ignacio was not the first married officer with whom Shauna had an affair. However, they contended that her fixation with Ignacio was the motivating factor behind her murdering Heather Garaus. The state struck an agreement with Shauna's former best friend, Michelle Moore, who used to accompany Shauna when she taunted Heather Garaus in public. Michelle agreed to testify against Shauna in exchange for reduced sentencing. During her testimony against Shauna, Michelle discussed how much Shauna hated Heather Garaus and even admitted to helping plan Heather's murder. Shauna took the stand in her defense during the trial, denying the accusations against her. She adamantly denied telling anyone that she fantasized about killing Heather Garaus or picturing her during target practice. Additionally, she denied having any involvement in the actual killing of Heather, stating that she was on her way to a liquor store at the time of the shooting. During her testimony, Shauna presented an alternative theory as to who may have been responsible for Heather's death. She claimed that her best friend Michelle was obsessed with her and wanted to make her happy by getting rid of Heather. However, when Michelle was called as a witness and cross-examined, she denied Shauna's claims. At the trial, the state alleged that Shauna was dressed in her husband's clothing items during the shooting, because she intended to set him up for murder. According to the prosecution, by getting rid of Heather, Ignacio's wife and Ken, her husband, Shauna, and Ignacio, would be free to live there happily ever after. After the jury was released to deliberate, it only took them 5 hours to return a verdict. They found Shauna Nelson guilty of first-degree murder. The judge addressed Shauna and told her she deserved every day of the sentence she received. Michelle Moore, Shauna's former best friend, was sentenced to 9 years in prison for her involvement in the planning of Heather's murder after testifying against Shauna. Ken Nelson resigned from the police department after Shauna was convicted of murder and filed for divorce. Following Shauna's guilty verdict, Ken moved out of state with his children, including Shauna's son, Christian, who she had with Ignacio. However, after some time, Ken moved back to Colorado, expressing hope that one day the children would be able to visit Shauna in prison. Regardless of the circumstances, Ken believed that no matter what, Shauna had always been a loving and great mother. The charges against Ken were eventually dropped. Heather's loved ones are relieved that Shauna is behind bars. They believe that justice has been served, and they hope Shauna continues to reflect on the pain she caused Heather every day for the rest of her life. Shauna's selfish actions took Heather away from her family and deprived her daughter, Victoria, of her mother's. Unfortunately, in 2015, when Victoria was 17 years old, she lost her life in a car accident. Tragically, she lost control of her vehicle and struck a tree, ending her life.
In 1995, Mansfield, Texas, located just outside Fort Worth, was a town with a population of approximately 8,000. However, during this period, the city was facing growing problems similar to those plaguing nearby Fort Worth, including gang and drug-related crimes. One teenager growing up in Mansfield in 1995 was Adrienne Jessica Jones. Adrienne Jessica Jones was a remarkable young woman who left a mark on her community. At 16, she captivated the hearts of everyone around her with her beauty and exceptional qualities. Her dedication to her studies, strong work ethic, and passion for sports made her a role model for many. In 1995, Adrienne Jessica Jones was a 16-year-old junior at Mansfield High School. From the moment she set foot on campus, she instantly became a beloved figure. Her classmates and teachers admired her for her kindness, intelligence, and infectious spirit. Adrienne Jessica Jones thrived academically. She consistently excelled in the classroom, taking advanced honors courses that challenged her to excel. Despite her busy schedule, Adrienne dedicated at least 2 hours of study time each night to ensure her success. Her hard work paid off, as she consistently achieved high grades. After graduating from Mansfield High School, Adrienne had big plans to become a vet and help animals. In addition to excelling academically, Adrienne possessed impressive athletic abilities. She was a girls' soccer team member and demonstrated remarkable skill and dedication on the field. However, an unfortunate injury during a game forced her to withdraw from the team temporarily. Instead of losing her passion for sports, she joined the girls' cross-country team. This decision to join the cross-country team allowed Adrienne to maintain an active lifestyle and helped her get into better shape. Adrienne Jessica Jones embraced the new challenge and worked tirelessly to improve her physical fitness. Her determination and dedication paid off, as she quickly emerged as a key cross-country team member. While pursuing her academic and athletic endeavors, Adrienne Jessica Jones also managed an impressive workload outside the classroom. In addition to her studies, she worked 20 hours a week at a local fast food restaurant, Golden Fried Chicken. Adrienne thrived on attention, especially from the teenage boys around Mansfield. One of her closest friends referred to her as a big flirt. She would spend at least 2 hours a day meticulously applying her makeup, ensuring that she looked perfect. Like most teenagers, Adrienne tested her parents' boundaries despite her good nature. She had 2 younger brothers, and her parents were particularly protective of her, as Mansfield was undergoing changes and there was more crime in the area. Her parents set a strict curfew for her on weekends, a little past 9 p.m. to ensure her safety.
If Adrienne informed her parents of her plans, such as visiting a theme park or watching a movie, she had to present them with a ticket stub as proof. Additionally, to prevent her from sneaking out, Adrienne's father decided to nail her bedroom window shut. Although it was not a common occurrence, there were a few times when she left her house in the middle of the night to meet up with her friends. On Sunday, December 3rd, 1995, Adrienne received special permission from her parents to stay up late in order to have a telephone conversation with her boyfriend, Tracy Smith. Tracy was out of town with his parents for the weekend, but Adrienne was eager to talk to him. However, during the phone call, Adrienne's mother overheard her daughter tell Tracy that there was another call coming in. When Adrienne's mother asked her the caller's identity, Adrienne replied that it was David from her cross-country team. According to Adrienne, David seemed to be upset about something. The following morning, Adrienne's family woke up and got ready for work as usual. However, Adrienne's mother became concerned when she heard Adrienne's alarm going off in her bedroom. Worried about why Adrienne didn't shut off her alarm, her mom went to check on her. However, when Adrienne's mom entered the bedroom, Adrienne was nowhere to be found, and her bed was still made. It didn't look like anyone had slept in it the night before. Adrienne's mother tried to remain calm when she realized that her 16-year-old daughter had gone missing. Initially, she entertained the possibility that Adrienne had embarked on a morning run, but this notion was quickly discarded upon finding her daughter's running shoes lying on the floor in the bedroom. In the past, Adrienne had occasionally sneaked out of the house in the middle of the night to meet up with friends. However, Adrienne had never stayed out all night before, causing her mother concern. Her parents contacted the police, worried about their daughter, not knowing that miles away, a man had made a gruesome discovery on his farm. At approximately 7 a.m. on Seton Road in Grand Prairie, Texas, about 10 miles from Mansfield, a man stumbled upon a distressing discovery. While walking to his mailbox, he noticed that the gate to his property had been knocked down. Intrigued, the man ventured onto the farm, where an unexpected sight awaited him. Initially, the man mistook the lump on the ground for roadkill. However, as he approached closer, he realized that he was looking at something far more sinister. The lifeless body of a deceased teenage girl lay before him. After discovering the deceased body on the farmland, the man promptly called the police. When the police arrived at the scene, they noticed a chilling sight. The teenager had been shot twice, with gunshot wounds evident on her left cheek and her forehead. Clearly, this was an execution-style killing. Furthermore, the police officers observed that the teenager had sustained severe injuries to the head. In addition to gunshot wounds and head injuries, the police officers noticed that the teenager was covered in scrapes and bruises all over her arms and legs. These injuries were the result of her running through the barbed wire gate at the front of the farm. She had put up a desperate fight for her life. Even more disturbingly, the teenager was dressed in night clothes. It was as if she had intended to bed, but her life took a tragic turn. The officers wondered if there was any connection to gang violence or drugs, considering the execution-style nature of the killing. After the discovery on the farm of the murdered teenager's body, the Grand Prairie Police took immediate action and sent out a teletype to all area agencies. This teletype contained the basic description of the young girl's body, including her approximate age range, height and weight, and other physical descriptions. The intent was to share this information and raise awareness, hoping another agency might have a missing person matching the victim in Grand Prairie. It was only a matter of time before the Mansfield police contacted the Grand Prairie officers. Through their investigation, the Mansfield police were able to identify the murdered teenager as Adrienne Jones. Once the police identified the deceased teenager in Grand Prairie as Adrienne, the next step was to notify her worried parents about the tragic turn of events. When the police told Adrienne's mother her daughter had been killed, she fell apart. Because Mansfield was a small town, it wasn't long before the news of Adrienne's murder reached her classmates and friends at Mansfield High School. As news of Adrienne's death spread throughout the halls, classes were stopped, and Adrienne's peers cried with one another. The people of Mansfield were on edge after the discovery of the murdered body of Adrienne Jones in a field. Theories were swirling about what might have led to her tragic death. One prevalent idea was that she was somehow involved in drugs. Others wondered if there was possibly a serial killer lurking in their midst. Adrienne's parents reported to the police the last time they had seen their daughter. Her mother provided details regarding a phone call Adrienne had with her boyfriend Tracy, as well as another teenager, David, who called in while she was on the phone. According to the mother, one of Adrienne's younger brothers heard the sound of a car engine outside the house sometime after midnight. Upon looking outside, the brother observed a pickup truck leaving the scene. The police were determined to find out who this David was who called Adrienne on the night she was murdered. In an effort to gather more information, they turned to Adrienne's cross-country coach. Adrienne's coach mentioned that there was a team member named David Graham. However, the coach expressed surprise upon learning that David would have been calling Adrienne, as she had never had any reason to believe that Adrienne and David had interacted. David Graham was an all-American teenager. At 7, after seeing his first air show, David told his father he wanted to become an Air Force pilot. From that moment on, he dedicated himself to achieving his dream. At Mansfield High School, David was popular and well-liked by his peers. He had a natural charisma and was always up for a good time. Many girls had caught his eye, but he was taken by a high school senior named Diane Zamora. Diane stood out from the crowd. She shared David's desire to enter the military one day and actively pursued her aspirations. In the days after Adrienne's murder, the police conducted interviews with David Graham. David admitted that he had known Adrienne from their time together on the cross-country team, but he insisted that their relationship had never progressed beyond acquaintances. During the interview, the police questioned David about whether he contacted Adrienne on the night she was killed. He adamantly denied the allegation, stating that he had been at home studying with his girlfriend Diane Zamora. The police conducted a thorough investigation of David, considering him as a suspect in the murder of Adrienne. As part of this investigation, they sought information from Adrienne's friends to determine if she had ever spoken about David. One of her closest friends informed the police that she knew about Adrienne's innermost secrets, but had never discussed David with her. Additionally, when the police accessed Adrienne's phone book, they noticed that David's number was not written down. This discovery further strengthened their belief that David had had nothing to do with Adrienne's murder and never even offered him a polygraph test. Consequently, the police removed David from their list of suspects. After David, the next suspect police looked into in connection to the murder of Adrienne was her boyfriend, Tracy Smith. However, the police were able to confirm Tracy's alibi, as he was out of town with his family on the night of the murder. Additionally, Tracy submitted to and passed a polygraph examination, which further supported his innocence. When Tracy Smith's interview with the police, he provided them with the name of a person who he believed should be investigated in relation to the murder of Adrienne. Tracy stated that on the night of Adrienne's murder, she had informed him of someone named Brian, who had called while they were on the phone. The police initiated an investigation into the identity of Brian. Their investigation revealed that the person in question was a local teenager named Brian McMillian. During the investigation of Brian McMillian, the police made a discovery. They learned that Brian used to work in a pharmacy near a restaurant where Adrienne used to work, and Brian had developed a fascination with Adrienne. Brian would frequently visit the restaurant to catch a glimpse of her. However, Adrienne grew tired of his constant presence and resorted to hiding in the back whenever she saw him coming. The police interviewed Brian McMillian concerning the murder of Adrienne Jones and initially denied any knowledge of her. However, Brian later admitted to knowing her. During the interview, one officer asked Brian if he had spoken with Adrienne on the night of her murder, to which he claimed not to remember. According to Brian, on the night of the murder, he had been drinking because he was depressed and lonely. One officer asked Brian if he had visited Adrienne's house the night she was killed, to which he admitted he might have. At the end of the interview, the police officers asked Brian's father if Brian could take a polygraph test, but Brian's father said no. 1 week after Brian's interview with the police, the officers stormed his house armed with guns. It was a decision that was made with careful consideration, as there was uncertainty surrounding whether Brian could be armed at the time of his arrest. The police had reason to believe that Brian might have a weapon, and they wanted to take all necessary precautions to ensure their safety, as well as that of everyone involved. After Brian was arrested for the murder of Adrienne, many individuals came forward to express their support on his behalf. His friends described him as gentle and non-violent. Additionally, Brian's father confirmed that he was at home the entire night that Adrienne was killed and never left the house. Brian spent 3 weeks in jail, including missing Christmas and New Year's, awaiting further investigation and legal proceedings. During this time, the district attorney's office arranged for Brian to take a polygraph test, which he passed with flying colors. With this outcome, the district attorney's office was left with little other evidence to connect Brian to Adrienne's murder and released him from custody. 9 months into the investigation into Adrienne's murder, the police in Mansfield, Texas, finally got the break they needed, and it came from Annapolis, Maryland, where Diane Zamora was attending the Naval Academy. According to the officers from the Naval Academy, Diane Zamora had confessed to some of her fellow cadets that back home in Mansfield, Texas, she and her boyfriend, David Graham, had murdered a girl named Adrienne Jones. The police officers from Mansfield went to Annapolis, Maryland, to interview Diane right away. During the interview, Diane denied making any such admission. However, the Naval Academy decided to suspend her and send her home as the matter was looked into. Because the police couldn't get any information out of Diane, they traveled to Colorado Springs, Colorado to question David Graham at the Air Force Academy. When the police interviewed David, he said he didn't know why Diane would make up a story about killing Adrienne Jones. However, as the interview progressed, David started to crack and asked to write a statement. In 4.5-page confession letter, David laid out all the details about how he and his girlfriend Diane planned to murder Adrienne Jones. In the letter written by David, he described a cross-country event where he decided to offer to drive Adrienne home in November 1995. During the ride, they parked in an elementary school parking lot and had intercourse. David admits that he felt a deep sense of guilt after this encounter. The reason for his guilt was simple. He loved his girlfriend, Diane, so much and knew that his actions would cause her immense pain. One evening, as David was helping Diane study for her SATs, an argument erupted between them. Unable to contain the guilt any longer, David decided to confess his infidelity. Breaking down in tears, he sat on the couch and told Diane that he had not remained faithful to her. He then went on to describe how he had hooked up with Adrienne. After David confessed to Diane that he had been unfaithful to her with Adrienne, Diane was inconsolable. The betrayal shattered her heart, leaving her feeling deeply hurt and enraged. Diane's anger boiled over, and she lashed out, arguing with David and screaming at him. She wished he were dead, and she felt intense hatred towards Adrienne. Diane's emotions were overwhelming, and she struggled to make sense of what had happened. David admitted he told Diane he would do whatever she wanted to save their relationship. He said that he and Diane came to the conclusion there was only one way to make their love right again: murder Adrienne Jones. David wrote in his confession letter that on December 3rd, he called Adrienne Jones and asked her to sneak out of her house late at night to talk. He requested Adrienne to keep the meeting confidential and between the two of them. Initially, David stated that he intended to get Adrienne alone, break her neck, and then dispose of her body by dumping it into a lake. At 2:30 a.m., David picked up Adrienne in his car. Diane, who was hiding in the hatchback, accompanied them. Once David reached a secluded spot 10 miles out of town, he turned off the highway onto Seton Road. David stopped on the side of the road, and Adrienne made a subtle adjustment to her seat, creating the impression that she and David were about to engage in an intimate moment. However, David had secretly summoned Diane from the trunk. Diane emerged from the rear of the vehicle and made her way around to the front of the car. As she approached, she confronted Adrienne, seated in the passenger seat. After Diane confronted Adrienne, Diane hit her in the head with a weight from David's gym set. Despite being grievously wounded, Adrienne did not die. Somehow, Adrienne managed to crawl out David's car window and escape. David and Diane panicked, so David grabbed his Makarov 9mm weapon and ran after Adrienne. Adrienne was very hurt, and because of her head wound, didn't make it far and collapsed in a field nearby. When David caught up to her, he shot Adrienne 2 times before walking back to his car. Once Adrienne was deceased, the first words Diane and David said to one another were, "I love you." After David confessed to murdering Adrienne, the police returned to question Diane, who had a confession statement of her own. David and Diane were arrested and charged with capital murder. However, both would later recant their confessions, with David claiming that Diane had committed the crime by herself and Diane alleging that David had acted alone. In 1998, Adrienne's mother filed a petition with the court requesting that the death penalty be removed as an option for David and Diane. Diane's trial began in February of that year. Several witnesses testified in court that Diane did not show any remorse for murdering Adrienne Jones. After deliberation, the jury found Diane guilty of capital murder on February 17th. As a result of the guilty verdict, Diane received an automatic sentence of life imprisonment with parole eligibility in 40 years. David Graham was also found guilty of the murder of Adrienne Jones. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Becky and Tim Bleefnick met while attending Quincy University. Becky pursued a degree in biology and played tennis, while Tim made a name for himself as an all-star football player. Those who knew Tim well described him as a fun, goofy guy who always greeted people with a hug. His infectious energy and warm personality made him a favorite among his peers. On the other hand, Becky's friends described her as a happy person who lit up a room just by her presence. Her positive energy and radiant smile made her instantly approachable. Because Becky and Tim were both attractive people, they seemed to complement each other perfectly. Their physical appearance and chemistry together made them look like the ideal couple. 2 years after graduating from Quincy University, Becky and Tim decided to embark on a new chapter in their lives by getting married. As a practical couple, they prioritized saving money over extravagant expenses. Tim chose not to buy Becky an engagement ring and didn't plan a lavish honeymoon following their wedding. Instead, they decided to invest their savings in a down payment for their first home. Becky's dreams in life included pursuing a career as a doctor. However, she ultimately decided against following this career path. While she had a genuine interest in medicine, Becky felt a strong calling towards motherhood. She yearned to experience the joy and fulfillment that came with being a mother. Her dream of becoming a mother came true, and she and her husband, Tim, had 3 sons. Being the mother was the ultimate joy for Becky, and she cherished nothing more than being a mother to her 3 boys. Becky loved spending quality time with them and watching them grow and thrive. As the boys grew older, Becky chose to pursue her dreams and aspirations. She decided to go back to school and obtain a nursing degree. Tim Bleefnick had always been a performer. From his days in the community theater in Quincy to his hilarious social media videos, Tim had a knack for captivating audiences with his wit and charm. In 2008, he decided to take things further and tried out for American Gladiators. While he didn't make the cut to compete on the show, he did manage to reach the final round of auditions. With an insatiable drive for attention, Tim found another opportunity to showcase his talent. In September 2019, the producers of Family Feud reached out to him, inviting him and his family to participate in the popular game show. However, Becky's nursing school commitments prevented her from joining him on the show. Determined to make the most of the opportunity, Tim rallied his family, including his parents and brothers. The premise of Family Feud revolves around 2 teams of family members or friends competing against each other by guessing the answers of a survey of 100 people provided. Steve Harvey, the host of the popular game show Family Feud, asked Tim Bleefnick what he thought the most popular answer was to the question, "What was the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?" Tim, known for his witty humor, shocked Steve Harvey and the audience with his response. Tim replied, "Honey, I love you, but said I do." This statement caught everyone off guard, and laughter filled the studio. Despite the unexpected nature of the response, it was ranked second on the scoreboard, earning points for Tim and his family. The Bleefnick family went on to participate in Family Feud for a 3-episode stint, ultimately winning a total of $20,000. This amount was divided among the family members, with each member receiving an equal share. However, there was one notable exclusion. Tim did not share any of the winnings with his wife, Becky. Despite Becky and Tim's years of marriage, their relationship had begun to strain. When Becky decided to pursue a career as a nurse, her husband, Tim, expressed strong opposition. Tim said his primary concern was Becky's well-being, as he worried about the stress associated with the nursing career. He believed that Becky had difficulties managing her patients and stress levels when it came to their children, and he wondered how this would affect her job performance. However, Becky's friends had a different perspective on Tim's opposition. They believed that Tim did not like Becky being independent and pursuing her interests out of his control. Over time, Becky's friends observed a decline in her happiness in her marriage. They observed that the initial 5 years of her marriage were relatively positive, but Tim's behavior became more manipulative and controlling. Becky's friends noted that despite Becky dedicating substantial time and effort to her nursing studies and work, Tim failed to shoulder his fair share of responsibilities within the home. Tim neglected to clean and didn't help care for their sons. He left everything for Becky to take care of after her long days standing on her feet as a nurse. Becky, recognizing there was a strain in their marriage, felt the need to address it with Tim. She believed that attending marriage counseling could help them find solutions and restore harmony in their relationship. However, to her disappointment, Tim disagreed with attending counseling. Despite Becky's dedication to resolving the issues in their marriage, Tim had a different plan. In January 2021, after 11 years of marriage, Tim filed for divorce from Becky. This decision surprised Becky, as she had shown determination and commitment in trying to save their marriage. However, Tim's decision was clear-cut as he moved out of the family home and into a house across town. Tim said that the reason behind his decision was a change in Becky's personality after becoming a nurse. He believed that her profession had taken a toll on her, resulting in a noticeable alteration in her demeanor. This change in Becky's personality, according to Tim, had a negative impact on their marriage. The divorce between Tim and Becky proved contentious. Tim and Becky were unable to find common ground, and their communication deteriorated. Both parties fought over various issues, including child custody, property division, and alimony. At a certain point, Tim applied for an order of protection against Becky. In this request, Tim stated that Becky had been stalking and harassing him, and referenced an incident where Becky became combative during a verbal fight at a parent-teacher night conference at their son's school. As evidence, Tim produced a video that he had recorded on his phone, which depicted Becky pounding on the door of his car outside the school. However, Becky had a different perspective on the situation. She alleged that it was Tim who was engaging in the harassment. Becky shared her concerns with several of her friends through text messages. In these texts, she detailed various incidents where Tim had screamed in her face, shoved her in front of their sons, and even thrown things across the room. In a particularly distressing text to one friend, Becky expressed her belief that Tim had serious mental health problems and that he was becoming more vengeful and unpredictable. After one of Becky's coworkers was murdered by her partner, Becky became increasingly fearful for her safety. She began to believe that Tim, her partner, was capable of committing a similar act against her. As a result, Becky texted her sister, saying that if any harm were to befall her, Tim would be the #1 person of interest. Becky's concerns were fueled by the fact that she feared that Tim would resort to drastic measures to separate her from her children. The text message left Becky's sister deeply concerned for Becky's well-being. She knew that Becky's fears were valid and that she needed to seek assistance. In an effort to protect Becky's life, her sister implored her to visit a domestic violence resource center. Eventually, Becky decided to file an order of protection against Tim. In her request, Becky claimed that Tim had entered her home without permission and had falsified their interactions. As a judge reviewed Tim and Becky's orders of protection, he determined not to grant either one. The judge ordered Tim and Becky to stay away from each other's homes except when they exchanged custody of their children. However, in February 2023, Tim called the Quincy Police Department and informed them that he would not be returning the gun to Becky. According to Tim, he didn't want to give the gun to that crazy bitch. On February 22, 2023, Becky and Tim's 3 sons, aged 12, 10, and 5, were spending the night with Tim at his home, 1 mile from where Becky was living. The divorce between Becky and Tim was set to be finalized in just 1 week. Tim reached out to Becky's father the following day, explaining that he had not been able to get in touch with Becky, and that Becky had failed to pick the boys up from school as she was supposed to. Knowing how dedicated Becky was as a mother, her father knew that something must have happened to prevent her from fulfilling her parental responsibilities. Prompted by his concern for Becky's well-being, Becky's father immediately drove to her house. Upon arriving, he made entry and walked around, shouting Becky's name. Hearing no response, he went up the stairs and entered Becky's bedroom. Inside the room, he noticed something disturbing. Becky was lying face up in a pool of blood, covered in gunshot wounds. Detectives and crime scene investigators arrived at Becky's house after her father discovered her bloody and lifeless body face up in the bathroom. Upon their arrival, the investigators began their investigation by carefully examining the outside of Becky's home. After a thorough search, they identified that the suspected perpetrator gained entry by prying open an upstairs window in one of the children's bedrooms. This discovery led them to believe that the suspect utilized a patio chair to facilitate their entry into the house and climb up to the roof. Investigators followed the path they believed the suspect had taken. They walked towards Becky's bedroom, where the door appeared violently kicked down or broken. The broken state of the bedroom door indicated to the investigators that the suspect had forcibly entered the room, most likely searching for Becky. Evidence suggested that Becky had attempted to barricade herself in the bathroom, but the suspect had followed her and caught up to her. However, the suspect followed her and caught up to her, ultimately shooting her inside the bathroom. The investigators, while conducting their search around the bathroom where Becky's body was found, stumbled upon her cell phone. Upon examination of Becky's phone, they discovered that she had dialed 91126 at 1:11 a.m. This discovery led the investigators to form a theory about what had happened that night. They believed that as the suspect was chasing her through the house, she desperately tried to call for help but mistakenly dialed the wrong number. Before Becky had a chance to try to call 911 again, the investigators thought the suspect knocked the phone out of her hand. Because the misdialed call occurred at 1:11 a.m., investigators believed that Becky was likely killed around that time. However, when officers canvassed Becky's neighborhood, no one recalled hearing any noises around that time. The lack of witnesses raised suspicions among the investigators, as Becky had suffered multiple gunshot wounds, making it unlikely for someone not to have heard something. As investigators conducted a thorough search of Becky's house, it quickly became apparent that her murder was not the result of a botched burglary, since nothing was missing. Despite the absence of any stolen items, the perpetrator left a significant amount of evidence behind. One notable discovery was a partial shoe print discovered near the spot where the suspect entered the premises. The shoe print could help identify the make and model of the footwear worn by the suspect and provide details about the size and shape of their feet. Furthermore, the investigators stumbled upon 8 9mm shell casings at the scene. Additionally, the investigators noticed small pieces of shredded plastic scattered across the floor near Becky's body. With all these pieces of evidence collected, the investigators were uncertain what to make of their findings. Therefore, they decided to send the collected evidence to forensic laboratories for analysis. Detectives wanted to find out if any of Becky's neighbors had security cameras outside their homes. One neighbor in particular had installed a camera on the side of their house after their car had been broken into 1 year earlier. This camera was directed towards the neighbor's driveway, which shared a boundary with Becky's home. The camera's function was to turn on and alert the neighbors whenever movement was detected. Unfortunately, on the night of Becky's death, the camera was unable to record anything significant. However, further investigation revealed that the camera had captured something unusual the previous day. At 1:05 a.m., the day before Becky was killed, the camera captured a person walking down the driveway toward the back of Becky's house. Approximately 48 minutes later, the same individual was observed walking in the opposite direction. Becky's neighbor's camera had also recorded a similar incident about a week earlier on February 14th. After Becky's neighbors noticed a dark-clad figure lurking around her house on their security camera footage on Valentine's Day, they wasted no time in informing her. The neighbors said she became paranoid once they informed Becky about the mysterious figure. Although Becky told her neighbors she didn't see anyone on her property, she heard voices in her backyard the night before, which scared her. Because of the security camera footage from Becky's neighbor, officers searched the rest of the neighborhood to find more footage showing this dark-clad, mysterious person. Officers found videos from a house and the Quincy bus barn. In that footage showed a person on a bike dressed in dark clothing riding toward Becky's house. These videos showed a person riding a bike dressed in dark clothing, consistent with the description of the mysterious person seen in the driveway footage. After detectives had analyzed the recorded times of the videos, they began to suspect that the person seen on the bike was the same person seen in the footage from Becky's driveway. Although Becky's neighbor's security camera did not capture any footage of the mysterious person on the night of her murder, officers stumbled upon footage of a person on a bike riding in the direction of Becky's house right before and after the incident. The person in this footage matched the description of the person seen lurking in Becky's driveway in the days prior to her murder. Even though the video evidence proved to be helpful in the investigation into Becky's murder, it did not provide a significant amount of information due to the poor quality of the footage. The detectives were unable to identify the person depicted in the video, as the image was grainy and made it difficult to determine if this person was male or female. However, one noticeable aspect of the video that stood out to the detectives was the bike the individual was riding. They observed that it did not appear to have reflectors on the wheels. When Becky's sister heard that she was murdered, only one person came to mind as a suspect: Becky's estranged husband, Tim Bleefnick. Becky's sister, who had a first-hand account of the contentious divorce between Becky and Tim, shared this information with the detectives working on her sister's case. With this information, the detectives began to consider Tim as a suspect in Becky's murder. The timing was especially significant, as Becky's murder occurred 1 week before they were supposed to finalize their divorce. As the investigation into Becky's murder continued, investigators made a crucial discovery: a bike lacking reflectors on its wheels, which matched the ones seen on the security camera footage only a block away from Tim Bleefnick's house. This discovery intensified the suspicion surrounding Tim, prompting the detectives to obtain a search warrant for his residence. When the police executed the search warrant, Tim was compliant and respectful throughout the search. He willingly stood outside his home, accompanied by the officers, as investigators looked through his belongings. On March 13, 2023, 2 weeks after Becky was murdered, Tim was arrested and charged with her murder. After Tim was arrested, his mugshot became public, and his appearance shocked Becky's family and friends. What they saw in the mugshot was a far cry from the clean-cut man they once knew. Instead, they saw a disheveled, unkempt person who appeared in poor physical condition. To many, Tim's appearance reflected the effects that the divorce had on him. His once well-maintained appearance had deteriorated, with unkempt hair and messy clothing. Friends and family members speculated that the divorce had taken a toll on his physical and mental well-being. However, Tim had a different explanation for his changed appearance. He claimed that he was growing his hair out for charity. According to Tim, he was participating in an awareness campaign to support cancer research. Because of Tim's appearance on Family Feud and his bizarre response about wishing he had not married his wife when he was arrested for murdering his wife, the clip went viral. Many saw Tim's remark as an eerie foreshadowing of what was to come. They argued that the bizarre response on Family Feud served as an eerie indicator of Tim's true intentions and feelings towards his wife. Some even labeled it as a warning sign that something sinister was brewing within their relationship. The investigators thoroughly examined Tim's phone and discovered he had created a Facebook account under the name John Smith. Through their investigation, the detectives learned that Tim was searching for a bicycle on Facebook and found a blue Schwing without any reflectors on the wheels. This discovery was intriguing, as it matched the description of a bike found abandoned 1 block away from Tim's residence. Despite the strong case against Tim, the detectives encountered a significant challenge. When arrested, Tim was held without bond, but he enacted his right to a speedy trial. Under the terms of this right, prosecutors were required to bring the matter to trial within 90 days of Tim's arrest. The prosecution faced a significant challenge in convincing a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Tim murdered Becky due to the absence of a confession or DNA evidence. Juries typically looked for these two key elements in criminal cases. In this case, the state lacked both. In order to successfully prosecute Tim for his wife's murder, the prosecution had a daunting task ahead. Exactly 3 months after Becky Bleefmick's tragic murder in her home, Tim Bleefmick stood trial on May 23, 2023. During Tim's trial, the state presented evidence to the prosecution that investigators had recovered at the crime scene. One of the pieces of evidence discussed was the shredded pieces of plastic found on the floor around Becky's body. The prosecution claimed that the shredded plastic pieces were pieces of an Aldi's grocery bag. The prosecution further presented evidence to the jury that stacks of these bags were later found during the search of Tim's house. According to the prosecutor, Tim used the plastic bags to act as a silencer as he shot his estranged wife several times. They argued that Tim utilized the bags to muffle the sound of the gunfire and prevent it from being heard by others. The prosecution alleged that Tim left DMA while using these Aldi bags. They called an expert to the stand who testified that Tim was more than likely the DMA contributor. This expert also testified that Tim's DNA could not be excluded from DNA found under Becky's fingernails. The prosecutors presented evidence to the jury indicating that a crowbar found in Tim's basement may have been used to pry open the window at the victim's house on the night she was murdered. However, an expert testified that although there were microscopic consistencies between the pry marks and the crowbar, she could not say that the crowbar found in Tim's basement was used. To strengthen their case, the prosecution presented several searches that Tim had made on his phone, including 1. How to open my door with a crowbar. 2. How to make a homemade pistol silencer. 3. How to clean gunpowder off your hands. 4. Average police response time in Quincy. The prosecution called an expert to the witness stand who testified that she compared the shell casings found at the crime scene to shell casings investigators found when they searched Tim's house and determined that 27 of those casings from Tim's home had been fired from the same 9mm weapon used to murder Becky. However, when investigators searched Tim's house, they never found Becky's 9mm gun, which he had refused to turn over to her. Tim later stated that he had not seen that weapon in months before Becky was murdered. When the defense had the opportunity to call witnesses, they opted not to do so. After the 6-day trial ended, the jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. As a result, Tim was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even though Tim claims innocence and says he plans to appeal his conviction, Becky's family believes that he is exactly where he should be. During Tim's sentencing hearing, Becky's family have the opportunity to read impact statements. One of Becky's sisters took this opportunity to make Tim aware of the consequences of his actions on the well-being of his sons. She emphasized the point that the choices he had made were causing his sons to suffer. Despite Becky's passing, her sister vowed to keep her alive in the hearts of her 3 sons. On the night of June 23, 1993, the officers closest to a crime scene had to undertake the unsanitary task of digging through trash. They had a penis to find, and it belonged to John Bobbitt. Lorena, his wife, had sliced it off while he was sleeping. It's been 31 years. John and Lorena are alive and well, and their story remains unforgettable. John and Lorena Bobbitt were a former American couple whose story kept the world shocked and amazed at the audacity of humans when pushed to the extreme. John Wayne Bobbitt married Lorena Gallo on June 18, 1989. John was born in New York and raised in Niagara Falls. Unfortunately, his father was out of the picture and he was taken away from his mother, who was a drug addict, at the tender age of 3. He had 2 brothers, and with them he went to live with his aunt and uncle. John stated that he grew up in a large family, and his aunt and uncle raised them to be religious. The family went to church every Sunday, and John joined the party gladly. When John came of age, he enlisted in the Marines, since many of his friends were doing the same. For John, there was no sense in being alone while all his friends were gone, so he found himself a new family, the U.S. Marines. On the other hand, Lorena was born in Ecuador in 1969, but raised in Venezuela. Undoubtedly, she started migrating early in life. As Lorena recounted in her Amazon documentary, she had watched a lot of American television as a child, and it sold her the American dream. Her dreams came true when she migrated to America on the student visa. Lorena enrolled and studied at Northern Virginia Community College. John met Lorena at a Marine Corps officers' ball in 1988 while still serving in the Marine Corps. It does not matter if you have banished love at first sight into the pages of cheesy romance books. It happened for John and Lorena. They were attracted to each other, and the chemistry was sublime. John described her as shy and didn't speak much English, but the chemistry was enough to start something. So that was what they did. They started dating each other. In 9 months, they were married. John Bobbitt married Lorena on June 18, 1989. According to an interview with 2020, the couple had different versions of how they got engaged. John claimed Lorena proposed to him in the presence of her mother. Lorena claimed the reverse was the case. Their wedding was a small one and officiated by a justice of peace. John adds that love or silly affection for one another had not rushed their wedding. They married quickly because Lorena's student visa would soon expire and she wanted to remain in America. It was her lifelong dream to live in America anyway, and who was John to deny her of such? This was one of the varying instances of their stories. According to Lorena, The abuse started right away after they got married. John has a contrary story. In his account, he did not harm, rape, or forcefully lay his hands on Lorena. He stuck to his story every time he was asked, and it was hard to pinpoint what was going on with the couple. John added that sometimes when she started fighting him, he restrained her. He maintained his innocence and absolved himself of the assault claim made by Lorena with his testimony. Contrary to John's story, Lorena shared a version of her husband's assault. 1 month after their wedding, the couple were in a car when John started driving recklessly. Lorena was afraid for her life. Who wouldn't be? In her fear, she asked him to stop, placing her hands on the steering wheel. She intervened in a bid to straighten their route. It was at that moment that John, according to allegations levied against him, punched her for the first time. On June 22, 1993, John had suggested a divorce to Lorena, which upset her. Since she was still scared of him, she went to the police for help. The trip was in hopes of getting a protective order against John. The process took about 3 hours, but Lorena did not want to wait that long, so she left before she completed it. In the early hours of that evening, John went out drinking with his friend who had come to stay with him. When he returned home, he wrote to Lorena before he fell asleep. When he awoke, John said he had no memory or recall of what had transpired. He did not remember sex taking place between Lorena and himself, and the closest thing to a physical contact he vaguely remembered was petting, and that was it. On June 23, 1993, Lorena came home from work like any other day. John came home that night and raped her. It seemed the act was more customary than it was a one-time event. Afterwards, Lorena walked into the kitchen for a cup of water. There among the kitchen utensils was the knife that could give her breathing space from the instrument of torture her husband used to inflict pain on her. Lorena grabbed an 8-inch Jinzu carving knife she saw on the kitchen counter and walked into the bedroom with it. Lorena pulled back the sheets and severed John's member. Shortly after, Lorena left the apartment, got into a car, and drove away with the severed appendage in one of her hands. As she drove on, navigating the road with one hand on the wheel became too much work, as the other hand held a severed member. She soon threw the shaft out of a window into a roadside field on Maplewood Drive. She drove around, not knowing what to do or whom to call. Eventually, she stopped and dialed 911, reporting what had happened and giving directions to where they could find her husband's missing appendage. The officers got there and got to work. After an exhaustive search, they did find John's missing appendage, washed it with antiseptic, and kept it in an icebox. Afterwards, paramedics drove him to a hospital. The surgeons reattached it in a surgical operation that took almost 10 hours. The incident happened in the early hours of 1993, around 4 a.m. By nightfall, Lorena had been arrested by the police and charged with the crime of malicious wounding. She risked spending up to 20 years in prison if found guilty. When Lorena Bobbitt was arrested, she reportedly told the police, "He always has an orgasm, and he doesn't wait for me ever to have an orgasm. He's selfish." The conversation ensued with Detective Peter Wintz and was recorded on a tape recorder. Mary Grace O'Brien, the Assistant Commonwealth Attorney of Prince William County, who was prosecuting Lorena, read the recording transcript that was read at trial. Many things about the couple's relationship came to limelight during the trial. Their home was somewhat volatile and had not been a happy place for Lorena. The Bobbitts revealed details of the event that led to the eventual act. Lorena accused John of abusing her sexually, physically, and emotionally. In addition to that, he flaunted his infidelity in her face and even forced her to abort a pregnancy. An expert witness had testified that John's threat imprisoned Lorena. "I will find you, whether we are divorced or separated. Wherever I find you, I will have sex with you whenever I want to." The defense lawyer, Blair D. Howard, maintained that Lorena had acted in self-defense, coupled with temporary insanity. He stated that it was Joan's behavior and constant harassment that led to Lorena's snapping. She had been suffering from clinical depression. In addition to a truckload of post-traumatic stress disorder in the next, one would likely have a mentally unstable person in their hands. The defense argued that John's perpetual abuse of his wife had caused everything. John denied all the allegations of abuse and harassment, but when Howard, the defense lawyer, cross-examined him, he found it hard to be consistent, conflicting his statement with known facts. In the course of the questioning, he weakened the prosecutor's case. In Lorena's testimony, there had been other rapes and physical battering on many occasions before the evening of the incident. She revealed that their finances were unstable, and John had not only stolen her earnings, but also spent the proceeds. Other witnesses corroborated Lorena's stories and claimed they had seen cuts and bruises on her. John's friends came forward to testify that John told them how he controlled her, forcefully had sex with her, and dominated her. The prosecution and the defense attorneys agreed that John definitely had a history of abusing his wife, and the repeated acts built up to the assault over time. The expert witnesses from both ends concluded that Lorena had been constantly battered and abused, and by 1993, she lived in fear of John. Before Lorena's trial, John was on trial from the 8th to the 10th of November 1993. On the 11th of November 1993, a jury of 9 women and 3 men found him not guilty of marital assault. John Bobbitt gave different variations of what happened between midnight of June 22nd and the early morning of June 23rd, 1993. In one account, he said they had not had sex, and even though Lorena had initiated sex, he was too tired to engage in it. In another account, he claimed that they had had sex, but he had slept through the whole act. The sex was, however, consensual, not a rape. After 7 long hours of deliberation, the jury found Lorena to be the most credible. She was found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. On the 24th of January 1994, Lorena was admitted into a psychiatric ward for 45 days. It was a 45-day evaluation period at the Central State Hospital in Petersburg. On March 1st, 1994, she was released after being considered not a threat to herself or the society. In 1995, John and Lorena Bobbitt finalized their divorce. A series of events led to what happened between Lorena and John Bobbitt. Not taking them into account might seem like a biased way of reporting what went down. As he was the victim, John Bobbitt's severed penis gained all the attention and the sensation it could get. Not just that, due to what had happened, some feminists frowned on what Lorena had done as they feared it might have far-reaching consequences. But that would be a one-sided story. John was discharged from the Marines in 1991 and no longer had a steady paycheck. Ask anybody and they will agree that losing a credible and steady source of income might slow things down in any family. He had trouble finding or keeping a job. The role of the sole household provider soon fell on Lorena. At this time, Lorena worked as a manny in the Virginia area and as a manicurist in a beauty salon. Lorena soon developed a close relationship with the woman who owned the salon, Jana the Sudi. In October 1991, Lorena started to embezzle the Sudi's money. She stole about $7,000, and when the Sudi realized the embezzlement, she ordered Lorena to repay the stolen money with interest. Lorena could keep her job at the salon, but looked elsewhere for her newfound hobby of theft. She stole a few dresses from Nordstrom, and when she got caught, she was punished with community service. In the same year, Lorena had an abortion, and they had different stories about what happened again. According to Lorena, she was excited to start a family, but John did not receive the news with the same enthusiasm Lorena exhibited. She adds that John did not think he could care for the baby and suggested leaving Lorena if she kept and had the child. The fear of raising a child alone led Lorena to the choice of an abortion. and she insisted that John was the reason she had it. John's story was different, as he recounted that Lorena had agreed that the time was not right for the couple to have a baby. They both decided on the abortion together. After the incident, John remained broke. To generate money, he tried to form a band called the Severed Parts to pay his mounting legal and medical bills. The band was not a success, and it failed to generate money. In September 1994, John appeared in an adult film, John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut. After the trial, John Bobbitt moved to Las Vegas, where he met Ron Jeremy. In an interview he had with Vanity Fair, John opened up about the adult film. "A porno seemed like the best way to show my penis worked, only it wasn't all the way healed yet. I realize now that that was the point." The movie had not yet premiered when charges were brought against John by his new girlfriend, Christina Elliott. He was found guilty of misdemeanor and domestic battery charges. He served 12 days out of the 15-day sentence a judge handed him. John divorced Lorena in 1995, and in 1996 he took another role in an adult film. One would wonder what the endgame was and why his phallus needed to grace screens. He had a reason that was at least reasonable to him. Asides the financial part, John had said yes to an offer from Howard Stern to undergo a reconstructive plastic surgery which would see the penis further enlarged. The second porno was titled Frankenpenis and was released in 1996. In 1999, John had accumulated a lot of legal issues for himself, ranging from assault to battery. He pleaded guilty to a charge of felony with attempted grand larceny after stealing $140,000 worth of clothing in Nevada. In the same year, a court found him guilty of harassing an ex-girlfriend named Desiree A. Luz. In 2002, he was charged afresh with battering his third wife, Joanna Farrell. He was found not guilty and was acquitted. Lorena resorted to keeping a low profile after the trial. To achieve that, she reverted to the use of her maiden name, Gallo. In October 1996, she visited Ecuador, the place of her birth, and had an official dinner with the current president, Abdallah Bucaram. The unlikely couple then baptized a child together as a godfather and a godmother. Their relationship sparked controversy in the media. The president was even criticized for having dinner with Lorena. In 1997, Lorena was in the news again after she was charged with assault against her mother. Reports had it that she punched the woman, Elvia Gallo, while they watched television. Lorena was soon acquitted of the charge and her mother remained with her. Lorena Gallo returned to the community college and found Dave Bellinger. The two became lovers in the late 90s and have since been together. Though they are unmarried, they have one daughter named Olivier together. Their decision to stay unmarried is speculated to be fear for marriages on Lorena's part, as her first marriage had not worked. In 2007, Lorena Gallo started a foundation aimed at helping women who were in abusive relationships. Her foundation was called Lorena's Red Raggin Foundation, a nonprofit organization that helps survivors of domestic abuse. Lorena and John were never seen together in public, at least not until 2009, when they made their first and only joint television appearance. All through their trial, before, during, and after, the couple took interviews but separately, never together. That changed in 2009 when The Insider brought them together. In the interview, Lorena told John, "You drove me crazy. You drove me insane. No woman should go through what I went through." In 2019, a docuseries titled Lorena premiered on Amazon and reignited conversations around the incident involving Lorena Bobbitt, her claims of domestic abuse and marital rape. Back in the 1990s, the Bobbitts were the talk of the time and the opening line for every comedian in the country. It definitely would have a different reaction today. In an interview with Olivia B. Waxman, Lorena Gallo opens up about how she felt about her case in the media reports. She said, "It was sad because they were more concerned about ratings than anything. They were more concerned about his penis instead of domestic violence. They missed the whole concept of domestic violence and abuse against women by a mile." She continued, "This is a very important issue that's going on, and you're more concerned about the man who lost his penis. The whole country was divided into women and men. Unfortunately, we're still in a patriarchal society. It's a man's world. That hasn't changed much." She further lamented how the new generation knew nothing about the story and how it went down. She disclosed that there was a history that preceded what happened. She further spoke on how she guided the detectives and police officers to where she had dumped her former husband's member. According to her, her help in finding her ex-husband's member depicted that she was not vindictive and that the incident was not out of spite. She declared that if she had done it with bad intentions, she would have replied to them with unconcern. Aside from the TV show where they had met in 2009, very little is said by John Wayne Bobbitt about the incident. He admits he still harbors feelings towards Lorena, but they hardly see each other. "I loved the woman she was," John said in an interview. With all indications, he had moved on from the incident, and even though the incident had made him famous and featured in 2 adult films, it seemed there was no staying out of trouble for John Bobbitt. While his former partner now has a foundation for women who are survivors of domestic abuse, Bobbitt, as of 2019, was reported as living in North Las Vegas and searching for treasures hidden in the Rockies by Forrest Fenn, according to Vanity Fair. In the August 2018 issue of Vanity Fair, John stated he was paying his bills from the settlement he received from a car crash he suffered in 2014. He also told the magazine that he had a penile reduction surgery in 2016 in a bid to reverse the cosmetic work he had undergone in earlier years. John still maintains his innocence. According to what the New York Times reported, he said, "Gallo was never abused. She was the abuser, and she cut off my penis because I was going to leave her." The story of Lorena and John Bobbitt happened at a time when patriarchy was still rife and marital rape was just starting to have laws against it in the 50 states of the United States. Lorena was inspired by her own story and the incident, yet she feels sad about the big picture which the sensationalist media of the time ensured people missed. In a way, John's genitals gained more popularity than the underlying condition that caused it to start with, which was domestic violence and abuse. From t-shirts to commercials, the term Bobbittize was everywhere. Today, her story may have taken a different turn. The media and general public would have addressed Lorena's part more than it was in 1994. There is no doubt that the system that empowers men because they have phallus is what Lorena Gallo wants to stop with her foundation, as she thinks women deserve to be heard and helped. Amy Chozick, in her interview with Lorena Gallo, described her as being straightforward and open. "I know I'm still Lorena Bobbitt. That name, it's significant here," Lorena says as Heather Sten of the New York Times reports. As Lorena drove Amy around in the neighborhood where it all happened, she admired what she had done for herself and how far she had come. She was quoted by Heather Sten saying, "I'll put myself through the jokes and everything, as long as I can shine a light on domestic violence and sexual assault and marital rape." She had no time to regret what she had done, the cutting off of her husband's penis. Amy asked her if she had regretted doing that, and her response was, "How can you regret something you didn't mean to do?" Today, a woman like Lorena would have been celebrated for standing up for herself and being a voice for the voiceless. Regardless, in her gentle way, the way she inspires is as graceful. And her war, albeit unintentional, against domestic violence was one she subdued. On May 5th, 2009, just before 3 a.m., the Coleman family, known for their seemingly perfect life, was found brutally murdered in their own home. Let's piece together the events of that fateful night of a crime that left an indelible mark on the hearts of many. Chris Coleman met his wife Sherry when he was in the Marines, and she was in the United States Air Force. It was love at first sight for Sherry. She knew right away that Chris was the guy she wanted to be with for the rest of her life. Within a few months, Sherry was pregnant with their first child, Garrett. Because Chris and Sherry were devout Christians, they married before Garrett was born. Chris called his dad, Ronald Coleman, to break the news they were now married and expecting a baby. Ronald was surprised but happy to hear that Sherry was expecting a baby. After Garrett was born, it wasn't long before Chris and Sherry had their second son, Gavin. Gavin was their wild child, while Garrett was more laid back like his father, Chris. Both boys had bubbly personalities and were good little boys. Sherry lived and breathed for her sons, and she was like a mama bear. If you stepped on one of her children, you better watch out. Chris was a very good father, and they made a great family. They laughed, played together, and cherished every moment with their sons. Once the Colemans left the military, they relocated to Waterloo, Illinois, a small town. Their house was situated in an upscale neighborhood, the result of a successful new job that Chris landed. Chris became the head of security for the renowned TV evangelist Joyce Meyer, the CEO of one of the largest Christian ministries in the world. However, Joyce's multi-million-dollar income and opulent lifestyle sparked controversy among certain individuals. Critics accused her of being a greedy con artist who exploits the fears of her followers. They claimed that her financial success and lavish lifestyle were at odds with her religious teachings. Chris served as a bodyguard and personal security guard for Joyce. One of his primary responsibilities was to monitor and safeguard against hate mail and letters sent to Joyce's church. These threats were often aimed at Joyce's life, with people expressing their intentions to find and cause harm to her. Joyce's ministry, based in St. Louis, Missouri, allowed Chris to earn a living as a bodyguard. He made a substantial salary of $100,000 per year, which provided financial stability for his family. In addition to his role as a bodyguard, Chris often accompanied Joyce on his travels around the world. Wherever she went, he followed closely. This constant presence allowed Chris to provide additional security for Joyce. However, it meant that he was away from home for extended periods. Sherry confided in a friend that one year, while Chris was working for Joyce, he had been gone 260 days out of the year. She was stressed out because the boys, Garrett and Gavin, missed their dad. The boys hated when he was gone, and they would mark off each day on a calendar until he came back from his trip. Garrett and Gavin would stare at those days until they were up, eagerly waiting for their dad to return. However, by the time Chris did finally get home, it wasn't long before he had to leave again. This constant cycle of absence caused a lot of tension in Chris and Sherry's marriage. Sherry was tired of doing everything alone, sick of being both the mom and dad. She felt overwhelmed and underappreciated, and the constant juggling act was taking its toll on their relationship. In October 2008, Chris traveled to Tampa, Florida, where Sherry had attended high school. Sherry reached out to an old friend, Tara Lintz, and asked if she would be able to check in on Chris while he was in town. Chris eventually got in touch with Tara after settling in Tampa, and they decided to meet up. Tara graciously showed Chris around the city. On November 14, 2008, at approximately 11 p.m., Chris received an email that stood out. The email address was destroychris@gmail.com, and the subject line and content terrified him. This email stated that Chris should stop working for Joyce Meyer, or else he or his family would be killed. As the hours passed by, more aggressive emails arrived at the ministry from the same email address, reiterating the threat and indicating a specific time and date when the attack on his family might occur. The sender of these emails knew Chris Coleman's schedule and knew that he would be traveling out of the country. Chris informed Sherry about the email threats he had received, and the following Monday, he reported the emails to the local police. He explained that he was not home much because he had traveled with Joyce Meyer Ministries. The police offered to conduct patrols around the residence when Chris was not home, but despite the increased police presence, Sherry continued to fear for her family's safety. Sherry once asked a friend to stay with her because she was not comfortable staying alone in the house with Chris away. She made it clear that she was deadly serious about protecting her family and willing to take whatever measures necessary to ensure their safety. To show her friend that she was serious, Sherry revealed that she had a gun and demonstrated how to hold it in case someone broke into the home and she was not present. 2 months after the death threats began reaching the Coleman family, an unmarked hand-delivered letter arrived abruptly in their mailbox. The letter, written in bold letters, demanded immediate action. It read, "Deny your God publicly or else. No more opportunities. Time is running out for you and your family." This threat was ominous and explicit, stating that if the Colemans failed to comply with the request, they would face dire consequences. Sherry was deeply shaken by the unsettling message. This intrusion into her private space, coupled with the explicit threat to her and her family, left her feeling genuinely frightened. Throughout the ordeal, Sherry's fear intensified with each passing day. The letter served as a reminder of the potential danger lurking around the corner, waiting for an opportunity to strike. After receiving a death threat in the mail, Chris and Sherry Coleman decided to take extra precautions to protect their family. As a part of this effort, Chris installed surveillance cameras outside his home. These cameras captured footage of the surroundings and were sent to a screen in the basement office of their home. Additionally, the footage was saved on a digital video recorder, allowing Chris to have a permanent record of the incident. He hoped that the surveillance cameras would help him identify the culprit responsible for the threats against his family. Shortly after Chris installed the security cameras outside his house, the threats against the Coleman family stopped. Life returned to normal for Chris, Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. For a while, things were quite good. In April 2009, Sherry told everyone that she was feeling better about her marriage and was determined to do whatever it took to make it work. She expressed relief that the death threats had stopped arriving, and she felt a sense of happiness. However, her optimism did not last for long. Another letter arrived at the Coleman home, this time containing an ominous warning. It stated that her worst nightmare was about to come true. Chris, Sherry's husband, was disturbed by the contents of the letter. He decided to examine the footage captured by their security camera from the previous night. To his surprise, he noticed a silhouette that caught his attention. However, the identity of the figure remained a mystery. This new development brought back the fear and concern for Sherry and her children's safety. Once again, she found herself living in constant fear of the unknown. The reassurance she had gained from the temporary lull in threats had vanished, and she felt that her worst nightmare was imminent. The local police increased their efforts in response to the escalating threats against the Coleman family. One neighbor, Justin Barlow, a detective sergeant with the nearby City of Columbia Police Department, took a special interest in the case. Detective Barlow took it upon himself to personally reach out to Chris through telephone. During their phone conversation, Detective Justin Barlow informed Chris that he noticed Chris's absence from home for work. The detective offered assistance, stating that his cell phone number was available if Chris needed anything or had any concerns. Detective Barlow reassured Chris that he could respond more quickly than the police if there were an emergency, since he lived in the neighborhood. Detective Justin Barlow, who lived across the street from the Coleman family, set up video cameras to monitor their driveway over several weeks. The footage captured by Detective Barlow's cameras depicted the Coleman family going about their daily routines, but it did not capture the person who had left death threats for them. Despite Detective Barlow's efforts, the videos failed to provide any clues or information about the person behind the messages. Chris headed to the gym at 5:45 a.m. on May 5th, 2009. Approximately 1 hour after leaving, Chris dialed his home phone number to ensure that Sherry and the boys were up and ready for school. However, no one answered the call. Alarmed by the lack of response, Chris called his neighbor, Detective Justin Barlow, at 6:45 a.m. Chris explained to Detective Barlow that he had left home around 5:30 a.m. and traveled to the gym in St. Louis County. While exercising, he made calls to Sherry's phone to ensure she was awake. However, to his surprise, she was not answering. This growing concern prompted Chris to ask Detective Barlow to check on Sherry and his sons. Detective Justin Barlow grabbed his essential items, including his weapon, handcuffs, flashlight, and radio, before heading out to secure the Coleman residence. As he waited for the dispatcher to send a unit to assist him, he had one goal: making contact with Sherry and ensuring everything turned out okay. With a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, Detective Barlow approached the door of the Coleman residence. He knocked firmly, hoping he would get a response. However, the silence that greeted him sent shivers down his spine. The lights inside the house were off, and there was no movement as far as he could tell, which gave him a bad feeling. Within minutes of Detective Justin Barlow arriving at the Coleman home, a patrol vehicle pulled up with another officer to help him. The second officer was sent to the rear of the house to see if he could peer through a door or a window or make contact with Sherry or the boys through the back of the house. However, as soon as the second officer got there, he found signs of forced entry into the basement. This discovery immediately caught the attention of Detective Barlow, who began to think that someone in the house was in danger. The detective was deeply concerned about the safety of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. After discovering the signs of forced entry into the Coleman home, Detective Justin Barlow and the second officer decided to enter the premises through the basement. As they announced their presence, they received no response. Conducting a thorough search in the basement, they stumbled upon a disconnected video cable at the computer desk. This discovery led them to conclude that the camera's digital video recorder had gone missing. Detective Justin Barlow and the second officer worked their way up the steps of the Coleman home from the basement. As they ascended the steps, the officers noticed a strong whiff of aerosol spray paint. The smell grew stronger as they approached the main level of the home. After climbing the stairs, they saw the wall was painted with spray paint. The messages scrawled across the surface were derogatory and directed at Chris, Sherry, and their sons. 13 minutes after Chris called Detective Justin Barlow, Chris returned home from the gym. Detective Justin Barlow told Chris to wait outside as they searched his home. Chris did not try to come in or ask any questions. Instead, he sat down on the porch quietly. At the same time, a third officer arrived at the Coleman home. The three officers knew they needed to search the rest of the house for Sherry and the boys. As they made their way upstairs, they came across more hate-filled spray-painted messages on the wall. Upon reaching the second story of the Coleman home, Detective Justin Barlow entered the bedroom of Garrett, the oldest Coleman son, only to find him seemingly asleep. However, upon closer inspection, the detective realized that Garrett was not alive. Signs of life were nowhere to be found, and his body was cold to the touch. Ligature marks were visible around his neck, indicating that the young boy had indeed been murdered. The discovery of Garrett's lifeless body sent shockwaves through the detective's mind. In the next room, the second officer walked in to check on Gavin, but to his horror, he discovered that the boy was also deceased. Just like his brother Garrett, he had ligature marks around his neck, indicating that he had been strangled. The killer had even spray-painted an obscene message on the bedsheets, adding an extra element of horror to the scene. The third officer entered the master bedroom and found himself confronted by a disturbing sight. Sherry, deceased like her sons, lay lifeless across the bed. Her hair was strewn across her face, concealing her features. It was clear to the officer that Sherry had been murdered. As the officer examined the room, he noticed several bruises on Sherry's body. These injuries seemed to indicate that she had put up a fight, defending herself and trying to protect her sons. After Detective Justin Barlow and the officers found the dead bodies of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, they heard Chris enter the house, having been waiting outside for news about his family. Chris announced himself, unaware of the seriousness of the situation. Detective Barlow had to break the devastating news to Chris that his entire family was gone, murdered. This news was too much for Chris, and he took it hard. Detective Barlow took Chris outside with the intention of providing him with some privacy to process the news. However, as the reality of the situation sank in, Chris's reaction was overwhelming. Chris started to feel sick, and his body seemed to collapse. He curled up in a fetal position, unable to contain the wave of emotions washing over him. The shock of what had just unfolded was too much for Chris to comprehend. Chris couldn't believe that his family had been taken away in such a violent way. In a moment of despair, Chris made a desperate attempt to reach out to his father, Ronald. He called Ronald and told him that something had happened to Sherry and the boys. Upon receiving the news, Ronald immediately realized that Chris was in shock. Ronald couldn't believe that such a tragedy had happened to his family. News of the shocking murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin quickly spread throughout the community of Waterloo, Illinois, where the Coleman family resided. As neighbors woke up to the grim news, they were devastated and terrified. The Coleman family had always been seen as a perfect American family, with their charming sons, Garrett and Gavin, admired by everyone. One of the neighbors expressed the sentiment that everybody would want their children to be like Garrett and Gavin, as they were always polite, helpful, and had hearts of gold. For Sherry's brother and mother, the harsh reality of the brutal crime was impossible to accept. Chris was taken to a nearby police station for questioning after his wife and 2 sons were discovered murdered. Detective Justin Barlow asked Chris if he could shed any light on the killings. He expressed a lot of regret for leaving to go to the gym and leaving Sherry and the boys alone in the home. When Detective Justin Barlow asked Chris if he had any idea who could have killed his family, Chris claimed that he had no idea. However, there were several things that stood out to the detective during the interview that seemed suspicious. One of the initial issues was the fact that Chris never asked how his wife and sons were killed. This lack of curiosity seemed odd to the detective, considering the gravity of the situation. It seemed as if Chris was not genuinely interested in finding out the details of how his family was murdered. Furthermore, the detective noticed that Chris was trying to hide scratches on his arms during the interview. He asked for a blanket in the room, even though it was warm, to conceal the injuries. These scratches raised a red flag for Detective Barlow, as the detective knew that Sherry, Chris's wife, had fought her killer for her life. When the detective asked Chris how he got the scratches, he said it was from putting up a satellite dish the day before. During the interview with the detectives at the police department, Chris adamantly denied having a relationship outside of his marriage. However, Chris did admit to having a close friendship with a woman named Tara Lintz, a cocktail waitress and high school friend of his wife's who lived in Florida. Chris admitted that his wife would not have approved of their conversations, but he insisted that he had no intention of leaving his wife for Tara. He claimed that he would never consider betraying his family in that way. However, a different story emerged when one of the detectives reached out to Tara in Florida. According to Tara, her relationship with Chris was more than just friendship. She alleged that they had been in a full-blown affair since November 2008. Tara provided the police with her phone and laptop computer, which contained extensive evidence in the form of emails, explicit pictures, and videos that she and Chris had sent to one another throughout their relationship. When the detectives confronted Chris with the information Tara had provided them, Chris admitted that he had been seeing Tara more frequently than he had initially confided in the detectives. Further investigation revealed that Chris and Tara devised a system to meet up at locations where he worked for Joyce Meyer. They met in secret, often traveling to exotic destinations like Hawaii to enjoy time together away from their families. Chris insisted that his relationship with Tara was not considered an affair, stating that an affair implies a deeper level of commitment and involvement than he and Tara had. However, the detectives discovered some interesting information from Tara's cell phone and computer. Tara had a calendar marked with a wedding to Chris and scheduled vacations. She appeared to be under the impression that Chris was planning to leave his family for her. This evidence raised suspicions among the detectives, as it contradicted Chris's assertion that their relationship was not a serious affair. Chris's father, Ronald, was stunned to learn their son had an affair. However, Ronald insisted that Chris's relationship with Tara had nothing to do with the murders of Chris's wife and son. Ronald said that Chris had always been gentle and would never commit such heinous crimes. He emphasized that Chris was a quiet man who exhibited no signs of violence. Detectives believed that Chris's affair with Tara Lintz was a strong motive for murder. However, their preliminary investigation determined insufficient evidence to charge him with the crime. So, after 6 long hours of questioning, Chris walked out of the police department without any charges being filed against him. Tara Lintz became a person of interest in Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin's murders. However, she was cleared as a suspect when the detectives determined that she was in Florida the morning of May 5th, 2009, when the family was killed. The murders of the Coleman family sparked one of the largest murder investigations in Illinois history. A task force consisting of 25 detectives was assembled to track down the killer. For 15 days straight, they worked 20-hour days, calling in professionals to assist with the case. One of the key focuses of the task force was determining the origin of the hate-filled emails sent to Chris Coleman. Every threatening email the Joyce Meyer Ministries received over the past year was meticulously examined, leading the team to locations all over the country. Each person who emailed Joyce Meyer was tracked and interviewed, but none of the individuals who sent those threats appeared to be responsible for the Coleman family murder. A computer forensic team was brought in to investigate the murder of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. The detectives who requested their assistance were hoping to uncover any digital evidence related to the crime. This team began by analyzing the email account destorychris@gmail.com. By conducting analysis, the computer forensic team discovered that the email address was created on November 14, 2008, just days before the first email was sent. One of the more surprising discoveries made by the team was the fact that the death threats sent to Chris Coleman's family originated from the IP address associated with Chris himself. The detectives continued to investigate the Coleman family's murder by conducting a meticulous examination of both the spray-painted messages found at the crime scene and Christopher Coleman's handwriting. To gather evidence, they took photographs of the spray-painted messages at the crime scene and collected samples from Christopher Coleman. These samples were then sent to a handwriting expert for analysis. After comparing the two samples, the expert concluded that the handwriting matched the spray-painted messages. This finding led the detectives to conclude that Christopher Coleman was the one who wrote the messages on the walls of his home on the day of the murders. A chemical analysis identified the brand color of the spray paint as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red. After being informed of Chris Coleman's purchase at a hardware store days before his family was killed, one detective decided to reach out to the manager of the store. The manager confirmed to the detective that Chris had made a purchase at the store, and the specific product he had purchased was Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red spray paint. This discovery was significant as it linked Chris Coleman to the same type of spray paint that was used in the murder scene. During the investigation into the Coleman family murders, the time of death became a significant aspect. Chris initially told investigators that he had left his home around 5:45 a.m. on May 5, 2009, the morning his family was murdered. However, the medical examiner confirmed that Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were killed around 3 a.m., which meant Chris was home at the time of his family's murder. 2 weeks after the discovery of the bodies, Chris Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution argued that these crimes were driven by greed, selfishness, and narcissism. Chris Coleman, it seemed, had decided it was time for a fresh start, and his family was in the way. In April 2011, Chris Coleman was put on trial for the murder of his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin. The state alleged to the jury that Chris had killed his family because he wanted to be with Tara Lintz, but couldn't divorce his wife, Sherry, because he would lose his well-paying job with Joyce Meyer Ministries since they did not believe in divorce. During the trial, Chris's defense attorney argued Chris was innocent of murdering his family and alleged an intruder walked into the home on May 5, 2009, and killed them. 2 years to the day of the murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris Coleman was found guilty of their murders. The judge sentenced Chris to life in prison without parole, even though he was eligible for a death sentence. This decision was because the state of Illinois had recently repealed the death penalty, which was scheduled to come into effect just a few months after the murders. Sherry's family and friends were determined to ensure that she, Garrett, and Gavin would never be forgotten, and they wanted to do something meaningful to honor their memory. They decided to raise money for victims of domestic violence, a cause that was near and dear to their hearts. Jessica Lester met her future husband, Matthew Boynton, while they were both still in high school. Jessica, a year younger than Matthew, was immediately impressed by him. What set Matthew apart was that his grandfather was the sheriff of their small town of Griffin, Georgia. This connection granted him a certain status and privilege within the community. Additionally, Matthew came from a wealthy family, which was evident from the way he dressed. He often wore designer brand names such as Hollister and Ralph Lauren, which further added to his allure. At 16, Jessica discovered she was pregnant with her first child. This news came as a surprise to her and her then-boyfriend, Matthew. Despite the support from her grandparents, who wanted to help raise the baby, Jessica was determined to settle down with Matthew and begin their family together. In December 2014, Jessica and Matthew were seemingly the perfect couple. However, behind closed doors, Jessica had a brief affair and became pregnant. Matthew, determined to raise the baby as his own, decided to marry Jessica. Matthew, inspired by his grandfather's career in law enforcement, decided to follow in his grandfather's footsteps. He worked as a Pike County Sheriff's Department jailer when he finished high school. After some time at the Pike County Sheriff's Office, Matthew's hard work and dedication caught the attention of law enforcement agencies in Griffin, Georgia, and he was hired as a patrol officer. Jessica and Matthew rented an apartment in Griffin, Georgia, where they settled with their 2 young children. However, Sheriff Wendell Beam, Matthew's grandfather, heavily influenced their lives. The sheriff played a significant role in the lives of both Matthew and Jessica. One of the main challenges they faced was the lack of personal resources for Jessica. Since she didn't have her credit card or vehicle, she was heavily reliant on Matthew or his grandfather whenever she needed something. On days when Matthew had to work in his patrol car, he would often take the keys to his pickup truck, leaving Jessica stranded at home with 2 young children. Even though Jessica and Matthew appeared to be the picture-perfect couple to the outside world, that was far from the truth. In the spring of 2016, Jessica discovered Matthew was having an affair with a 911 dispatcher named Courtney. Determined to protect herself and her sons, Jessica reached out to her grandmother for support. Together, they made an appointment with a lawyer to discuss their options. On Friday, April 15th, Jessica had made plans to take her sons and move into her sister's house. Jessica found a job at a chiropractor's office to support herself. On April 15th at 10:16 p.m., Jessica and Matthew visited Walmart, and the store's CCTV system captured their visit. The couple and their children were spotted purchasing baby formula during the visit. However, while at the store, an argument broke out between Jessica and Matthew. At approximately 10:47 p.m., 30 minutes after the initial argument, Jessica and Matthew left Walmart. CCTV footage shows them exiting the store as a couple, headed back to their apartment. At approximately 1 a.m., Matthew was on his way to the Waffle House to meet a fellow officer for dinner. However, as he approached the restaurant, he made a call to the 911 dispatch requesting a medical assistance service to be sent to his home. The reason for his request was alarming, as he stated his wife, Jessica, was experiencing thoughts of self-harm and was sending him disturbing text messages. Jessica's text read, "I can't do this anymore. Take care of the children. Please tell them I love them every day. I have been suffering for a while now and no one has noticed. Here lately, I have not been able to recognize the person I see in the mirror. This is not the first time I have had suicide thoughts. I love you and the boys." After Matthew called 911 dispatch and reported that his wife was having thoughts of taking her own life, the dispatcher assured him they would get officers to his house right away. The dispatcher then proceeded to ask Matthew if there were any weapons in the home, to which Matthew replied yes. He stated that his service weapon was located in the residence. While the officers were on their way to Matthew and Jessica's apartment, Matthew suddenly came on the radio and informed them that he had heard a shot fired coming from inside his apartment. He stated that as he was climbing up the stairs, he heard 2 rounds being fired and detected the distinct smell of gun smoke. Despite attempts to get an answer at the door, Matthew was unable to receive any response. Responding to the urgent situation, the officers assured Matthew they would arrive at the apartment within 2 minutes. They instructed him to stay outside the apartment until their arrival. However, Matthew expressed his additional concern, as not only his wife Jessica was inside, but also their 2 young children. When the officers arrived at Matthew and Jessica's apartment, Matthew informed them that he believed Jessica was in the master bedroom closet. He also said that he hoped she didn't shoot the children. In response, the officers made their way to the master bedroom closet and observed that it was locked. Undeterred, they decided to kick the door in to locate Jessica. Upon entering the closet, the officers found Jessica inside, slumped over with a Glock .40 caliber pistol lying near her body. The officers immediately realized that the gun belonged to Matthew, as he was employed in law enforcement. With urgency, they proceeded to pull Jessica's body from the closet and lay her on the floor of the master bedroom. After the officers pulled Jessica out of the closet, they discovered that she had sustained a gunshot wound to the head. However, despite the severity of the injury, Jessica was still alive. The officers promptly transported her to a waiting ambulance, ensuring she received immediate medical attention. Throughout the ordeal, Matthew, Jessica's husband, was visibly shaken and overcome with emotion. Matthew wept openly, expressing his deep love and concern for his wife. His words were filled with sadness and helplessness as he grappled with the prospect of life without her. Matthew was anguished over how he would break the news of Jessica's condition to their children, terrified by their reaction. Matthew couldn't help but feel guilty, blaming himself for not arriving home sooner. He wished he had managed to reach Jessica before she could carry out her tragic act. His mind raced with regrets, questioning why he had neglected to bring his duty belt, leaving it at home instead of in the car. At that moment, Matthew realized that this simple oversight had allowed Jessica to gain access to a weapon, leading to her life-threatening injury. Around 1:30 a.m., Jessica was airlifted to Atlanta Medical Center. After Jessica was transported to the hospital, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, arrived to investigate the shooting. The local sheriff's department was unable to investigate the incident due to a conflict of interest. Matthew's grandfather held the position of sheriff. Additionally, Matthew was a patrol officer for the local police department, which further complicated the situation. Due to these constraints, the local sheriff's department was prohibited from conducting an investigation. Meanwhile, Matthew was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the GBI's investigation. Sheriff Wendell Beam arrived at the scene after Jessica was life-flighted to Atlanta Medical Center. Upon arriving, he promptly dispatched a patrol car to Jessica's family's home to provide them with the devastating news. Unfortunately, although Jessica was not yet pronounced deceased, her condition was critical. At 3 a.m., the Georgia Bureau of Investigation conducted a search of the apartment belonging to Jessica and Matthew. During the search, the GBI discovered bullet holes in the upper area of the closet. However, they noticed that there was no blood splatter on the walls of the closet or the clothing inside. Instead, the majority of the blood found in the closet was on pillows, one of which was occupied by Jessica when the officers found her. Later on that morning, the GBI interviewed some of Jessica and Matthew's neighbors. These neighbors stated that they had noticed gunshots from around 10:45 p.m. to midnight the previous night. One of Jessica and Matthew's neighbors contacted the GBI agents to report hearing a single gunshot around 20 minutes after the initial sound. This neighbor stated that the second shot followed sometime after the first, but they could not provide an exact time frame. Another neighbor made a different report to the GBI agents. This person stated that they heard a gunshot around 11 p.m. This neighbor also mentioned that they heard an argument from Jessica and Matthew's apartment around the same time, from approximately 10 p.m. until 11:30 p.m. As word of Jessica's tragedy spread around Griffin, Georgia, one resident of the town thought it was strange that the master bedroom closet had a lock on the inside, but no keyhole on the outside. Another concerned neighbor, who had knowledge of all the apartments in Jessica and Matthew's apartment building, realized that all the closets were structured in the same way, with none of them featuring a lock on the inside that could be accessed from the outside of the door. This idea further fueled suspicions that something was amiss. At 4:18 a.m. on the morning, after the officers found Jessica shot in her closet, Matthew was brought in for questioning by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The agents informed Matthew that this was a criminal investigation and requested that he come in for questioning. Matthew assured the agents that he had nothing to hide. During the interview with the GBI agents, Matthew stated that he had received a text from Jessica expressing thoughts of taking her own life. Alarmed by this, Matthew quickly drove to the apartment and got out of his truck upon his arrival. As he approached the apartment, he heard 2 gunshots. Determined to help, Matthew ran towards the apartment and unlocked the front door. He then proceeded to run through the apartment, making his way to the master bedroom hallway. Upon reaching the closet door, Matthew attempted to open it but found that it was locked. He begged Jessica to respond but received no response. Matthew further informed the Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents that when he did not receive a response from Jessica, he ran back to the kitchen to retrieve his service radio. As he rushed outside, he cried and appeared shocked. According to Matthew, he heard gunshots around 1 a.m. However, his story did not align with what his and Jessica's neighbors reported. The neighbors stated that they heard the gunshots occur sometime between 10:45 p.m. and midnight. When the officers arrived at Jessica's family's home and informed them that she had tried to take her own life using Matthew's service weapon, something seemed amiss. Jessica's grandmother, who knew her well, immediately sensed something was off. She recalled an incident when 4 of her other grandchildren went target shooting, but Jessica adamantly refused to participate, citing her discomfort with firearms. This recollection reinforced her grandmother's doubts that Jessica would have willingly taken her own life, let alone leave her 2 sons behind. Furthermore, Jessica's upbringing further cast doubt on her suicidal intentions. Having grown up without parents, she had developed a close bond with her grandparents. They doubted that she would willingly end her own life and leave behind her 2 young sons. When Jessica arrived at the Atlanta Medical Center, she was described on her hospital intake form as a 19-year-old reported to have shot herself in the right skull. However, the trauma surgeon who treated her had a different interpretation of her injury. According to the trauma surgeon, neither of Jessica's hands had any evidence of gunpowder on them, indicating that she did not pull the trigger herself. Additionally, the wound was to the top of her skull, indicating that she would have had to point the weapon above her head, pointing downwards. This direction is highly unusual when attempting to take one's own life, as it would require a significant and unnatural adjustment of the firearm. Further investigation revealed that there were indentations on the wall in Jessica's closet, suggesting that one bullet had been shot at an upward angle as it entered the wall near the top of the closet, while another bullet hit the wall near the floor. These findings indicated that Jessica may have been shot by someone or something else, rather than self-inflicted. At the Atlanta Medical Center, Jessica had to undergo several medical procedures, and one of the procedures involved inserting an intracranial pressure monitor into her brain, which was used to measure and control swelling. Additionally, she was placed in a medically induced coma. This decision was made to help her brain heal and minimize further damage. Meanwhile, Matthew, Jessica's husband, made the decision to move himself and his 2 sons into his girlfriend Courtney's house in the aftermath of the tragedy. However, a few weeks later, the couple broke up. In a subsequent interview with the police, Courtney expressed concerns about Matthew's behavior, stating that she found him intimidating. During Jessica's first 3 weeks in the hospital, Matthew only visited her on 1 occasion. After 3 weeks in a medically induced coma, Jessica slowly started to regain consciousness. Her recovery was so fast that the Atlanta Medical Center staff referred to Jessica as the miracle child. Although Jessica's skull had been fractured, neither bullet had penetrated it. About a week after Jessica woke up from her coma, she was interviewed by agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. However, there wasn't a lot that Jessica could remember about that fateful night. During her interview, Jessica stated that the last thing she could recall was going to Walmart with her sons and Matthew. She couldn't remember anything after that. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents questioned Jessica regarding her handling of Matthew's service weapon. She denied ever handling the gun before, stating that she had no idea how to unlock the safety lever of the holster. The agents then posed another question to Jessica, inquiring if she had ever entertained thoughts of harming herself. Jessica's response to this question was emotional. She burst into tears and emphatically denied having any thoughts of harming herself. Her explanation was that she loved her 2 children too much to consider such an action. After spending a month in the hospital, the doctors initiated the process of transferring Jessica to a rehabilitation program. However, it was discovered that she didn't have insurance, which presented a significant hurdle. Because of the lack of insurance, Jessica was discharged to the care of her grandparents. Upon her release, Jessica exhibited a noticeable limp. She struggled with various symptoms, including headaches, short-term memory lapses, ringing in her ears, and numbness on the left side of her body. 3 days after Jessica left the Atlanta Medical Center, a deputy from the sheriff's office delivered a family violence protective order to Jessica. This order was issued by a court in response to a petition filed by Matthew, stating that there was probable cause to believe that family violence had occurred in the past and may occur in the future. The order said that Jessica was not allowed to come within 300 yards of Matthew or her children. During the trial, the judge dismissed the protective order that had been in place between Matthew and Jessica. However, the judge granted full custody of Matthew and Jessica's children to Matthew. The judge also ruled that Jessica would be allowed to visit her children every Sunday for a maximum of 4 hours. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents conducted a thorough investigation into the death of Jessica. After examining Matthew's service weapon for forensic evidence, they discovered her DNA on the handle of the gun, the safety, and the trigger. This evidence raised suspicions and led the GBI agents to believe that Jessica was responsible for shooting herself. Over 4.5 months, the GBI agents conducted an extensive investigation, gathering evidence and analyzing various scenarios. Their efforts led them to conclude that Jessica had indeed shot herself in the head. They found no evidence implicating Matthew or any other individual in the incident. As a result, the case was closed, and the GBI agents deemed Matthew to be innocent of any involvement in his wife's shooting. In December 2016, Jessica filed a report with the Griffin Police Department, stating that Matthew had failed to return her belongings. This complaint arose after Jessica came out of a coma, during which she had to purchase new clothing due to the loss of her original belongings. One of the items specifically missing was a retainer. Matthew provided a written sworn statement, assuring the authorities that he had not retained any of Jessica's possessions. Eventually, the Griffin Police Department discovered that Matthew was in possession of Jessica's gym bag with her belongings, despite his earlier statement under oath that he did not possess it. This revelation led to Matthew being forced to resign from the police department, and he relinquished his badge and service weapon. The department charged him with 2 felonies, making false statements and violating his oath of office. However, Matthew was never prosecuted for these crimes. Matthew, still the legal guardian of his and Jessica's sons, faced a difficult situation in 2018 when his children refused to stay with their father. Whenever Jessica picked up the children, they would cling to her and cry, expressing their desire not to stay with their father. Recognizing the importance of addressing these concerns, Jessica reported what her sons had told her to Child Protective Services. During the investigation, the children were permitted to stay with Jessica full-time. In the spring of 2019, Child Protective Services closed the case after carefully reviewing the reports and recommendations submitted by the children's psychologist. Based on the psychologist's findings, it was recommended that the children no longer spend time with Matthew. Life has moved on for Jessica since she was shot in the head. After the incident, she decided to relocate 2 hours north of Griffin, Georgia, in search of a fresh start. This decision allowed her to escape the constant reminders of her traumatic past. In her new location, Jessica found love and decided to embark on a new chapter of her life. She got engaged to a supportive partner who understood and empathized with her struggles. Furthermore, Jessica's life has been blessed with another addition to the family. She gave birth to a son, bringing joy and new meaning to her life. On May 24, 2019, Jennifer Dulos, a doting mother, was never seen again by her 5 kids and family. This shocking event threw the police into a deep investigation which uncovered an even more shocking truth. Jennifer Dulos's disappearance had been caused by someone who had at a time been the center of her world. Jennifer Dulos was born on September 27, 1968, in New York City to Hillard Farber, a banker, and Gloris Ortenberg, a philanthropist. Jennifer had just one sibling, her sister, Melissa Irene Farber. She studied at Brown University. She graduated in 1990. She got a master's degree in writing from New York University Tisch School of Arts. Jennifer's uncle, Arthur Ortenberg, and his wife founded a fashion company, Liz Clarebone, Inc. In 2004, Jennifer Dulos got married to her heartthrob, Fotis Dulos. They had 5 children together, 2 sets of twins and a girl. They named them all after Greek saints: Theodore Doulos, Constantine Doulos, Petros Doulos, Christian Doulos, and Cleopatra Noel Doulos. Jennifer and her husband, Fotis Dulos, were united for 13 years until their marriage hit the rock in 2017. Jennifer had grown scared of the man she was once in love with. This brings the question: who was Fotis Dulos, and what had changed about him? Fotis Dulos was born on August 6, 1967, in Turkey. He grew up in Athens, Greece. Fotis moved to the United States of America in 1986. He studied at Brown University and graduated in 1989. A few years later, Fotis bagged a master's degree in finance at Columbia Business School. Fotis met his first wife, Hilary Vanessa Aldama, at Brown University. They had attended the same school. He married her in Athens in 2000. After their marriage crashed in 2004, Fotis moved to Connecticut. Dulos had married Jennifer in September 2004, a month after his divorce. He had been seeing Jennifer while he was still married to Vanessa Aldama. After their marriage, they moved to Farmington. Their union produced 5 children Jennifer Dulos adored with her life. That was what made the police suspicious when she disappeared. Jennifer would never intentionally abandon her children. Before her disappearance, Jennifer had filed for a divorce and was fighting for the sole custody of her kids. Her marriage to Fotis had gone so sour, she had become terrified for her and her children's lives. The Dulos marriage hit rock bottom in 2017. Jennifer Dulos first hinted about her troubles in her marriage in a blog post on March 12, 2012. She shared how she wished she was a much stronger person, and confrontations did not scare and appalled her. In 2017, Jennifer Dulos filed for a divorce on the account that Fotis Dulos was increasingly living an independent life and cheating on her with his colleague, Michelle Traconis, a native of Venezuela. Jennifer Dulos filed for emergency custody of her 5 kids in 2017. Although the court denied her request, it granted her and Fotis Dulos shared custody. Jennifer Dulos was scared for her life, but most importantly, for the safety of her children. She claimed that her husband, Fotis Dulos, exhibited irrational, unsafe, bullying, threatening, and controlling behavior. She shared one of the unfortunate experiences she had suffered in Fotis's hands. On June 3, 2017, he had found out that she had planned activities for their children on a Saturday morning. It had not sat well with Fotis, so he lost control. According to Jennifer, he had become enraged and agitated. She was terrified and tried to get away from him by rushing upstairs. But Fotis followed all the way up, and even after she locked the door and bolted it so that she was trapped inside, he kept verbally attacking her and physically intimidated her. Jennifer Dulos knew she was not safe with her husband. She had invited trouble when she filed for a divorce. In an interview, she confessed that she was terrified of Fotis. She had admitted that her desire for a divorce had infuriated him, and he was going to retaliate by harming her in some way. Jennifer Dulos claimed that in May 2017, when she filed for a divorce, Fotis had threatened to kidnap and harm their kids if she refused to agree with his terms in the divorce settlement. He had even bought a gun that year. In 2018, Jennifer re-requested the emergency sole custody of her kids. During the hearing process, the court discovered that Fotis had broken several court orders. Jennifer was given full physical custody of her children, while both parents shared legal custody of the kids. Fotis was granted supervised visits and monitored phone calls. Jennifer and the kids moved to her rented house in New Canaan, 70 miles away from Fotis Doulos. Fotis Doulos had been genuinely hurt by Jennifer's accusation. In an email he sent to Jennifer in 2017, he expressed his concern for his children's well-being. He confessed that their children needed both parents, not just one of them. He had pleaded with Jennifer to reconsider their marriage for the sake of their children. He even stated that they could work as partners and learn to tolerate each other. However, while denying the accusation levied against him by Jennifer, Fotis claimed that Jennifer was the one turning their kids against him. He alleged that the mother of his children called him a psychopath and told the children he did not care about them. He also claimed that Jennifer had bragged about dragging the divorce over a space of 2 years so that she could have the mafia break his legs with a baseball bat. Fotis Doulos also denied ever threatening to kidnap his kids. He admitted to buying a gun, but he had only gotten it for home protection. Fotis Doulos' arguments could have been considered or even believed if the next event did not happen. Jennifer Doulos was last seen on May 24, 2019, at around 8:05 a.m. That day, she had dropped her children off at New Canaan County School and returned home shortly after. The police were alerted of her disappearance by some of her concerned friends. Jennifer had had 2 appointments with her doctor scheduled for 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. in New York City. Jennifer never missed her doctor's appointment, so her friends became worried that she had not shown up. Jennifer Doulos' friends were not the only one who noticed something unusual about Jennifer's disappearance. Her live-in nanny, Lauren Almeida, had been worried when she arrived at Jennifer's New Canaan apartment by 11:30 a.m. and met her Range Rover in the garage. She recalled that Jennifer had planned to take the car to her doctor's appointment instead of her Chevrolet Suburban, which was missing in the garage. Lauren Almeida did not inform the police of Jennifer's disappearance until 7 p.m. By that time, it was glaring that there was something fishy about Jennifer's absence, as she never arrived home that late or left home on her own without informing anybody. After the disturbing reports, the police began their investigations. Some detectives searched Jennifer's New Canaan house. However, they would break the hearts of everyone who cared about Jennifer Doulos. On the floor of the garage, blood splatters were found. And also, blood traces were found on one of the walls in the garage and the door. Blood traces were found on the exterior of the Range Rover as well. Inside the house, blood splatters were only found in the kitchen, and it was not Jennifer's blood alone. It was a mixture of hers and her husband, Fotis Doulos' blood. This made people wonder how Fotis Doulos had murdered his wife. Further investigations by the police showed that Fotis Doulos had been at Jennifer Doulos' apartment on the day she went missing. According to the police, Fotis had gone to Jennifer's home with a bike, as the tracks around the house were too small to belong to a car. However, Fotis lay in wait for his wife until she returned from dropping her kids off at school. He then shot her in cold blood, cleaned up the scene, and got rid of the evidence. At about 10:25 a.m., Jennifer's neighbor's CCTV captured the Chevrolet Suburban, leaving her home. The police believed that Fotis Doulos had been the one driving the car. The police alleged that he had hidden Jennifer Doulos' body and other items reasonable to the cleaning of the murder scene in the car. After hiding Jennifer's body, Fotis Doulos had abandoned the car 3 miles away from New Canaan. The police were confident that Fotis was a cold-blooded murderer because of his suspicious actions later that day. At around 7:30 p.m., Fotis Doulos and his girlfriend, Michelle Troconis, were caught on tape-dumping garbage in trash bins. This could have seemed pretty normal, except they had used 30 thrash bins in different spots in Alford Avenue, Hartford. When the police searched the bins, they discovered different incriminating items. In the garbage bags, the police found different cleaning items, some pieces of blood-stained clothes, and used hand gloves. A test was run on the items and the results confirmed the police's fear. The blood matched Jennifer Dulos, while Fotis's DNA was found inside one of the gloves found and on one of the thrash bins. Fotis Dulos murdering his wife in cold blood did not cause as much shock as his girlfriend, Troconis, being an accomplice in the crime. Michelle Troconis, a native of Venezuela, was many things. Troconis was a mother, a horse rider, and a former ESPN reporter in South America. But what no one would ever expect her to be was a cold-blooded criminal. Michelle Troconis started seeing Fotis Dulos whilst he was still married to Jennifer Dulos. Her affair with Fotis contributed to the breakdown of his marriage. After Jennifer went missing, the police brought Troconis in for questioning. When asked where she was on one day Jennifer disappeared, she claimed that she had had lunch with Fotis Dulos that afternoon, and also claimed that she and Dulos had gone to one of his properties to clean it up in preparation for a meeting with a client. The police believed that they had been cleaning up Jennifer Dulos's body. The police investigation led them to more videotapes showing Michelle Troconis in a more compromising situation. These tapes led them to find out exactly how Fotis Dulos had committed such a horrific act. Fotis Dulos had carefully planned out his moves, and the police believed he had not done so alone. On May 24, 2019, Fotis drove a Tacoma truck owned by his employee without his permission to New Canaan, Connecticut. In a video captured by a school bus at 7:05 a.m., the Tacoma truck was speeding on the highway towards Wavani Park in New Canaan, the place where Jennifer's Chevrolet Suburban will later be found. The police confirmed that a bicycle tire had been found in the boot of the truck. This affirmed the police's speculation that Fotis Dulos had cycled the 3 miles from Wavani Park to Jennifer's apartment in New Canaan. The police believed that Fotis had arrived there earlier before Jennifer. He had attacked in the garage just as she got back. Afterward, he had cleaned up the evidence, bundled Jennifer up in her Chevrolet Suburban, and driven straight to Wavani Park, where he transferred her body into the Tacoma truck. As meticulously as Fotis tried to cover up his tracks, he had left 2 huge pieces of evidence of his presence in the New Canaan house. He had left a sample of his DNA on the doorknob and a mixture of his and Jennifer's blood on the faucet in the kitchen. The police alleged that Fotis had spent hours cleaning the house, hence the neighbor's surveillance footage that showed Jennifer's Chevrolet Suburban leaving the house around past 11. The police were even more certain that Fotis Dulos was a cold-blooded murderer when he made another shocking move 5 days after his wife's disappearance. Fotis Dulos took the Tacoma truck out again without permission. This time, his destination showed that Fotis was as guilty as they come. He had driven the truck straight to a local car wash and detail shop. In the surveillance video of the truck, a black SUV was driving right behind him. The driver of the SUV was none other than Michelle Troconis. In the video, Fotis is seen dropping the car off at the car wash. Afterward, he had hopped in beside Troconis in her SUV. The police were convinced that the couple's mission was to rid the car of every bit of evidence. However, they were not so fortunate in their quest. Samples of Jennifer's DNA were found on the passenger seat of the car. As expected, with all the daunting evidence gathered against Fotis Dulos, he became the major suspect in Jennifer Dulos's disappearance. On June 7, 2020, Fotis Dulos was arrested and charged with capital murder, and kidnapping. Fotis Dulos had not been arrested for the murder and kidnapping of Jennifer Dulos until June 2020. You might expect that Fotis should have been arrested earlier. He sure was, but he had not been charged with murder. On June 1, 2019, Fotis Dulos and Michelle Troconis were arrested at a hotel in Avon, Connecticut. They were charged with hindering persecution and tampering with evidence. At the time of their arrest, the police did not have enough evidence against the couple. They both pleaded not guilty to the charges. Fotis Dulos has hired Norm Pattis as his attorney. Pattis strongly believed that Jennifer Dulos was dead. Fotis and Troconis were released. but in September 2019, they were arrested for tampering with evidence and hindering justice. However, in October 2019, Fotis appeared in court. He requested a dismissal of the charges against him. The judge mentioned that he would look into the case and review arguments from the prosecution and defense. During this period, Jennifer and Fotis Doulos were living with their maternal grandmother. The kids at that time were aged between 8 to 13. Their grandmother was granted temporary custody of the children by the court. Fotis Doulos' Waterloo came in 2020. In January, he was arrested and charged with the capital murder of his ex-wife, while his girlfriend, Michelle Troconis, was arrested for conspiring to murder. Following the arrests, Michelle Troconis became estranged from Fotis. In an interview, she admitted that she had made a huge mistake by trusting Fotis. Prior to their arrest in 2020, Troconis had allegedly moved out of the Fotis Farmington $5 million home with her daughter. Fotis Doulos' former lawyer and friend, Kent Douglas Mawhinney, was also arrested and charged with conspiracy to murder. Mawhinney was taken in at gunpoint. The police believed that he had helped Fotis and Troconis create an alibi on the morning of Jennifer's disappearance. Also, during that period, Douglas Mawhinney had been accused of spousal rape by his wife. Mawhinney became separated from his wife, and things got worse after he was arrested in connection to Jennifer Doulos' murder. His wife felt her life was in danger. His wife told the South Windsor Police Department that her husband was planning to kill her with the help of his friend, Fotis Doulos. During their investigations, the police discovered that Douglas Mawhinney was a member of a East Granby gun club. A group of local hunters informed the police that they had seen a human grave on a property associated with the club. The police went ahead to search the property in question and indeed found something very suspicious. A shallow grave was found on the secluded property. In the grave, the police found 2 bags of lime and a blue tarp. There was no body found in the grave, but the police believed that it could have been removed. The grave had been discovered with the help of a canine in August 2019. It was unfortunate that despite the arrests, Jennifer's body was not found. Her family was devastated despite the fact that their daughter was about to get justice. In an interview, the family's spokesman confessed that the arrest of the suspects did not give them any sense of closure. He admitted that the incarceration of Jennifer's murderer could never bring her back, so the ache in their hearts could never go away. Fotis Doulos' bond was set at $6 million on January 8, 2020. He was released the next day on bail, but he had to return to court on February 8, 2020. Michelle Troconis was released on bail as well, while Douglas Mawhinney's bond was set at $2 million. However, it was reduced to over $200,000. He was released on bail on October 19, 2020. Fotis Doulos' fear after his cruel actions caught up with him led to an unfortunate event. On January 28, 2020, Fotis failed to appear in court for an emergency hearing. The judge gave an order for him to be brought to court. On getting to his Farmington home, the police found Fotis in his car unconscious. Fotis, apparently, could not face the consequences of his actions, so he tried to take his own life. Fotis had poisoned himself with carbon monoxide. He had connected a vacuum cleaner to the exhaust pipe of his SUV and passed it back into the interior of his car. The police had performed CPR on him and restored a faint pulse. He was transported to Yukon Medical Center by ambulance. The center transferred him to Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx to undergo hyperbaric oxygen therapy. While at the hospital, Fotis' children, who were still living with their grandmother, visited their father. It was the first time they saw their father after he was accused of murdering Jennifer. A suicide note was found by the police in Fotis' car. He had written that he was not ready to spend an hour in jail over something he knew nothing about. On January 30th, 2020, Fotis was confirmed dead by the Jacobi Medical Center. After Fotis' death, the police report released showed that Fotis' last girlfriend, Anna Curry, claimed that she had been with him on the day of his emergency hearing. She told the police that she and Fotis had planned to drive to the court together. However, Fotis told her he would prefer that they go separately. Curry admitted that she had been terrified when Fotis's attorney had called her to ask why Fotis was not in court. She had been driving at the time, and she had told him that Fotis should have been in court, to which the attorney replied that Fotis's GPS tracker showed that he was still in his Farmington home. Curry immediately knew that Fotis had done something to harm herself, and she asked the attorney to call 911. After Fotis Dulos's demise, the murder charges against him were dropped. On March 3, 2020, a judge passed a novel prosequi request to the prosecutors. Fotis Dulos was not acquitted of the charges against him, but the case could not continue as he was dead. Novel prosequi is an acknowledgement of that fact. However, it provides the prosecutor with a year to refile the case, or it is permanently dismissed. During the hearing, Fotis Dulos's attorney expressed his interest in clearing his client's name. Norm Pattis believed that Fotis had been framed. He argued that whoever framed Fotis had dumped the bloodied clothes and other incriminating items the police found in front of Fotis's front porch. Fotis, in turn, had innocently set out to dispose of them. Hence, the surveillance footage the police had found. Pattis requested to substitute Fotis Dulos's estate as the defendant. However, Pattis's request has not been considered since. Michelle Troconis had been put on house arrest after she had been accused of conspiring to murder Jennifer Dulos. However, there had not been any significant progress on her case as the COVID pandemic had put the case on hold. Troconis's lawyer, John Sheonhon, in an interview, had confessed that there had not been even the slowest progress on Michelle Troconis's case. However, she was scheduled to appear in court on August 6, 2020, while Douglas Mawhinney was to appear on June 2, 2020. Both parties still pleaded not guilty to the charges. In an interview, Michelle Troconis addressed all the people who had made up their minds to judge her without even knowing her personally. She admitted that it was possible to misjudge people. However, she could not be the judge as to whether Fotis Dulos was capable of murdering his wife, but she was capable of judging the fact it had been a waste of time trusting Fotis, and rightly so. 4 years after Jennifer Dulos's disappearance, she still had not been found. Over the years, the police have scourged several places for her body. In 2019, the police had begun their search in Waveney Park, 3 miles away from New Canaan. They had made use of canines and helicopters to carefully search the area. However, when there was no positive result, the search was extended to New York City. The Dulos family owned a property there. The police had searched the property carefully before turning their attention to central Connecticut. The police did not relent in their efforts to find Jennifer as they went ahead to search Hartford CT. Their search had led to the surveillance tapes showing Fotis Dulos disposing of garbage bags in different trash cans all over the city. This led the police to the garbage processing plant of the city. The search took weeks, but it was worth it as the police found a lot of useful evidence. The search continued to a special fishing pond in Avon that the Dulos family usually visited. The police proceeded to central Connecticut. They searched houses that belonged to the missing's husband's company, 4 Inc. The area covered is estimated to be about 3,000 acres. However, Jennifer Dulos was not found. In August 2021, the search led them to a Farmington house on Mountain Spring Road, which was connected to Jennifer Dulos's husband. The police had chosen to search the house to follow old leads. A renowned expert in finding out unmarked graveyards, Bob Perry was invited by the police. Also, the police brought a septic rank and an excavator to get the best results. Up to this moment, the police have not given any information about finding Jennifer Dulos's body. Despite how horrifying Jennifer Dulos's story was, something good came out of it. In May 2021, the Connecticut State Senate passed a domestic violence bill. The bill was named after Jennifer Dulos and another woman who was a victim of domestic violence, Jennifer Magnano. The bill got almost undisputed support from every member of the Senate. On June 28, 2021, The bill was passed into law by Governor Ned Lamont. The other Jennifer the law was named after, Jennifer Magnaneau, was also a victim of a very toxic marriage. In 2007, she was murdered in cold blood by her husband, Scott Magnaneau, in Terryville, Connecticut. Immediately after the gruesome act, Scott Magnaneau committed suicide in front of their 3 children. Jennifer Dulos's family sadly has not been able to move past their daughter's death. In an interview, the family spokesman expressed how much the family missed Jennifer. He shared that Jennifer's wonderful personality and bright demeanor made even people who never knew personally hurt by her disappearance.